On my wedding night, my husband handed me a prenup and said, "Sign this or this marriage is over." He thought I'd have no choice, until I revealed what I had secretly prepared, and his face turned pale because the night was supposed to be one of the most memorable of my life, the culmination of years of love, laughter, and dreams for the future. My wedding was a fairy tale, a blend of elegant vows, family, and friends gathered in celebration. The hall was filled with soft music, the aroma of fresh flowers, and the glow of candles reflecting in everyone's eyes. Everything was perfect, or at least it should have been. I had imagined this day for years, walking down the aisle, the man I loved waiting at the altar. But nothing prepared me for what would happen in the quiet aftermath of our wedding reception. Before we dive into today's story, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for being part of this incredible journey. We're hitting 10K subscribers, and it's all because of your support. If you're enjoying these empowering stories, don't forget to subscribe. It's completely free and helps us grow this amazing community. Now let's dive in. We had just entered the private room for our first night together. He, my new husband, was all smiles, perhaps more so than I had seen in weeks. He was charming as always, the kind of man who could talk his way into anything. But behind those perfect smiles I could sense a coolness, an edge. Something wasn't right. He sat me down gently on the bed and handed me a piece of paper. At first I thought it was a gift. Some romantic gesture, perhaps an agreement to go on a dream vacation. My heart swelled as I reached for it. "Sign this," he said simply, as if his words were as light as a feather, as if they meant nothing at all. But the paper he handed me was cold, heavy with a message I didn't expect. A prenuptial agreement. "Sign this or this marriage is over." The words hit me like a brick, shattering the bliss of the evening in one fell swoop. I froze. I stared at the document, unable to process what was happening. His voice was casual, his posture unbothered, as though he truly believed I had no choice but to comply. And that's when it hit me, he didn't just want me as a partner. He wanted control. I glanced up at him, seeing the edge in his eyes. His arrogance wasn't masked in the slightest. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, the weight of it so much more than just ink on paper. The terms were clear. He would control the finances. His signature on the document meant that all shared assets, investments, and any potential business ventures would belong to him. I would have nothing, not even the smallest semblance of independence. If things went wrong, I would be left with nothing but the memory of a broken dream. It wasn't just a legal document. It felt like a cage. My chest tightened, and I suddenly felt like a mere accessory in his life. A possession, an item to be owned. How had it come to this? My mind raced, flashing back to all the moments I had trusted him, moments that now seemed so naive. It wasn't the love I thought we shared that was at stake. It was my very sense of self, my autonomy. For years I had been led to believe that we were partners, equals. But now, sitting here in the glow of our wedding night, I understood the truth. He was in charge and I was disposable. But I wasn't a fool. I had known the risks all along. There had been whispers, subtle comments, and warning signs that I had ignored or downplayed. Friends had mentioned it, how he was careful about his wealth, how he always kept a tight grip on what was his. But I had convinced myself that our love would be enough to balance any financial discrepancy. Now, as I sat in that room, clutching that piece of paper, I realized how wrong I had been. His words echoed in my ears. "Sign this or this marriage is over." The finality in his voice made it clear he wasn't bluffing. I could feel his eyes on me, studying my every move. He was watching, waiting for me to crumble, to do exactly what he expected. The silence stretched, but it was deafening. A cold, empty smile spread across his face as I continued to stare at the document. There was no pity in his eyes, no compassion. Only calculation. He believed he had me trapped, cornered, with no way out. But there was more at play here than he realized. He had underestimated me, and I was not about to let him win this game without a fight. I took a slow breath, my fingers tightening around the edges of the paper. What he didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for months. I had seen the writing on the wall, and I had anticipated this exact scenario. He thought I was weak, that I wouldn't question his authority or the control he was attempting to impose on me. But I had my own plans. Without saying a word, I slowly folded the prenup and tucked it into the side drawer of the nightstand. His eyes narrowed, the smile faltering for the briefest of moments. He had expected me to comply, but I had refused. I was no longer the woman who would silently accept whatever life threw her way. This was my life, my future, and I would not allow him to dictate it. "Is this a joke?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief, though there was an unmistakable hint of frustration beneath it. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "But you clearly thought you could control me. You underestimated me." He scoffed. "I thought you understood the situation, the importance of this contract. You really think you can just walk away from all of this?" I smiled, a small knowing smile that made him pause. "You don't know me as well as you think you do." There was a tension in the air, thick and palpable. His expression shifted from disbelief to anger, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. His attempt to control me had been met with resistance, and for the first time he wasn't in charge. He was trapped in his own web of arrogance. "Do you really think you can just escape this? Do you think I'll just let you go?" "I'm not going." The tension lingered in the room, thick and suffocating. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my exterior remained calm, almost serene. I could feel his eyes drilling into me, searching for any sign of weakness. But I knew this moment was not just a confrontation. It was a pivotal turning point. I was no longer the woman who would silently bow to his will. As the minutes passed, I could feel the power shift between us, a silent, invisible force that was moving under the surface. I stood at the window, staring out into the dark city skyline, but my mind wasn't on the view. It was on the life I had been living, the quiet sacrifices I had made to keep up appearances, to preserve the image of a perfect marriage. How had I been so blind? The signs were there all along. His subtle dismissals of my opinions, the way he managed every financial decision, how my own autonomy seemed to slip further away with each passing day. I'd always admired his confidence, the way he navigated through life with such ease, but now I saw it for what it truly was: a need to control. He wasn't just confident, he was domineering. It wasn't just our shared life that was under his control, it was everything. From the way I spent money, to the people I interacted with, to the places I went, he had his hand in it all. But the worst part wasn't even the control itself. It was that I had allowed it. For years I'd turned a blind eye to the way he had slowly and methodically built walls around me. Walls I hadn't noticed until now. It wasn't until the prenup had been placed in front of me that I realized the full extent of his hold on me. Everything was laid bare. He controlled the finances, the investments, the assets. And, as I now understood, the future. It was like a waking nightmare. I had believed in the illusion of partnership, in the fairy tale that he had sold me. I had imagined that we were two equals, bound together by love. But the prenup was the final curtain to that fantasy. It was as if he had revealed the truth in the cruelest of ways. Our marriage was never about love. It was about ownership, and I had been the one blind to it. The silence between us stretched, but in my mind, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the calm before the storm. As I turned away from the window, I could see that he was trying to recover from the shock. His confident exterior had cracked for just a moment, but now he was regaining composure. He straightened his posture and attempted to mask the unease in his expression, but I could see through it. His bravado was slipping. His eyes flickered with a trace of fear of losing control. "Do you honestly think you can just waltz away from all of this?" His voice had lost some of its usual self-assurance, the edges of desperation creeping in. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you?" I didn't answer immediately. I took a moment to observe him, how he tried so hard to maintain the facade of authority, how he couldn't fathom that someone might challenge him, especially not me. But I had changed. His words, once so potent, now had the opposite effect. They only reminded me of how far I had come, how far I had been willing to go to break free from the chains he had wrapped around me. "I'm not walking away," I said softly, my voice steady and filled with an eerie calmness. "I'm staying. But I'm staying on my terms. Not yours." The look in his eyes shifted once again from frustration to something darker. His lips thinned into a line, and for a moment, it almost seemed as if he was considering something, some hidden option that he thought could sway me back to his side. But I knew better now. The power dynamic had shifted. I had the upper hand and he was just beginning to realize it. "You're not the woman I thought I married," he muttered under his breath, almost as if speaking to himself. There was a trace of bitterness in his words, a hint of resentment. "This isn't you. You used to be so agreeable, so easy to manage." The insult stung, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I let out a quiet laugh, the sound foreign to my ears. Easy to manage. Is that how you saw me? Just another possession to be controlled? His face flushed red, the anger building in him. But his desperation was clear now, a far cry from the calm, controlled man I had married. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to think of a way out, a way to reclaim the power he had just lost. But there was no way out. Not anymore. I don't need you to tell me who I am, I continued, the words coming more easily now. I don't need you to define me. I've been living in your shadow long enough, trying to fit into your idea of who I should be. But no more. You're not the only one who can play the game of control. His eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I've been preparing for this day, I said, my voice dropping into a whisper. I knew the day would come when I'd have to take a stand. And when it did, I needed to be ready. He took a step forward, his anger barely contained. You think you've won? You think you've outsmarted me? I nodded slowly. Yes. I've outsmarted you. The look on his face was something I would never forget. An unsettling mix of disbelief, rage, and fear. His mind was spinning, trying to grasp what was happening, trying to understand how I had been able to see through him all this time. I have my own prenup, I continued, my voice unwavering. One that favors me. One that protects my assets, my future. I won't be left with nothing, not after everything I've given up for you. He blinked, unable to process what I had just said. I could see his world crumbling in front of him, the carefully constructed reality he had built around me starting to fall apart. His grip on his emotions was slipping with every word, and I knew that this moment, the moment when everything he thought he had control over shattered, was only the beginning. You think you've won? He spat again, though now there was an edge of panic in his voice. You think I'll let you get away with this? But I didn't need to hear any more empty threats. I had won. The reality of that was beginning to sink in, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This wasn't just about the prenup or even about the money. It was about me reclaiming my life, my dignity. It was about me showing him, and myself, that I was no longer the woman who would quietly accept whatever he handed me. I stood tall, looking at him one last time, my eyes unwavering. You don't control me anymore. And you never will again. The tension between us had reached a boiling point, but I could feel the heat of the moment starting to settle into a cold, calculating silence. He was still standing there, fuming, trying to regain his composure, but it was clear that the idea of losing control over everything was terrifying to him. My words had struck him harder than I had imagined. He couldn't reconcile the image of me as the obedient wife he had always manipulated with the woman standing before him now, calm, unyielding, and in control. He hadn't seen it coming. He had believed that I was nothing more than a docile partner, someone who would never question his authority. He had thought the prenup was his final weapon, the last tool he needed to ensure that his grip on our marriage and on me would be unchallenged. But I wasn't who he thought I was. I never had been. I'm still waiting for you to realize that this is over, I said, my voice soft but firm as I watched him struggle to make sense of the situation. You think you can control me with that prenup, but you've never known who I really am. His confusion morphed into anger, but there was something else in his eyes too, a flicker of fear. Fear that I was no longer the woman who would be pliable to his wishes. His jaw clenched as he took a step toward me, his voice rising with the same arrogance that had always been present. You're playing a dangerous game. You think you're clever, don't you? I tilted my head slightly, considering his words. It was clear he was trying to intimidate me, to reassert the power he thought he still held. But what he didn't know was that I had been playing this game long before tonight. You're the one who's played with fire, not me, I said quietly, the words hanging in the air like an unspoken truth. And now you're about to get burned. He stopped in his tracks, a mixture of confusion and anger brewing behind his eyes. I could tell he was trying to make sense of my sudden shift in demeanor. He had underestimated me for too long, and now he was reeling, trying to catch up. You think I don't have a plan? I continued, watching the expression on his face change with each passing second. You think I've just been sitting back letting you pull the strings? Well, I've been preparing for this moment for months. You're not the only one who can play this game. The realization hit him like a cold splash of water. He looked as though the ground had been ripped out from beneath him. The control he thought he had over me was slipping through his fingers, and now he was struggling to regain his footing. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in him before. He had been so sure of himself, so confident in his manipulation. But now there was uncertainty. The realization that I had outsmarted him was beginning to settle in, and it was a blow he wasn't prepared for. "What do you mean?" he demanded, his voice now tinged with something close to panic. "What have you been doing behind my back?" I allowed a small, knowing smile to curve my lips, savoring the moment. I had waited for this. I had waited for him to realize how far I had gone, how much I had prepared for this day. It wasn't just about a prenup anymore. It was about everything I had built in silence, while he had been too consumed by his own sense of superiority to notice. "I've been securing my future," I said slowly, letting the weight of my words sink in. "While you were busy thinking you controlled everything, I've been making sure I had something to fall back on. Something that would protect me no matter what you tried to do." His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? What could you possibly have that I don't already control?" I felt a surge of satisfaction as I watched his frustration grow. He still didn't get it. He still didn't understand how far I had gone. "I'm talking about investments. Business ventures. Things you would never think to look at. I've been setting things up in my own name. I've built a safety net, one that you can't touch." His face paled. The reality of what I was saying hit him like a tidal wave, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear flicker across his features. He had always been the one with control, the one who thought he could predict every move I would make. But now the tables had turned. "You've been investing behind my back?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "You've been building your own fortune and I never knew?" I nodded, watching him struggle to reconcile the truth. "You were too busy focusing on controlling me to notice. But I knew that someday I would need to protect myself. And now I have." His shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment I almost felt sorry for him. But I quickly shook off the sentiment. He had made his choice long ago, and now he had to deal with the consequences. He had underestimated me in every way possible, and now I was forcing him to face the reality of his mistake. "You think you can just walk away with everything, don't you?" he spat, his frustration now fully evident. "You think you can just take everything I've worked for and leave me with nothing?" "I'm not taking anything from you," I replied calmly. "I'm simply ensuring that I'm not left with nothing like you wanted. This marriage was never about fairness to begin with. You made sure of that. But I'm not playing by your rules anymore." The shift in his demeanor was palpable. His anger was still there, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of helplessness. He had always prided himself on being in control, on having the upper hand, but now that control was slipping away. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Why can't we just be a team? Why does it have to be like this?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was unexpected but because of the raw emotion in his voice. I had never heard him speak to me like that. It was as if he was finally realizing what he had taken from me all these years. The partnership, the equality, the trust. But it was too late for apologies, too late for regret. "Because you never saw me as an equal," I said quietly. "You never saw me as someone worthy of being treated fairly. And now you're learning the hard way that I won't let you control me anymore." There was a long silence between us, the weight of everything hanging in the air. His facade of power was crumbling, and I knew that this was just the beginning. But I was ready. I had spent too long building this moment, and now that it had arrived, I wasn't going to let it slip away. He looked at me for a long time, his expression a mixture of disbelief and rage. But in his eyes I saw something else too, a faint, fleeting understanding. He realized now that the game had changed, and he was no longer the one holding the cards. The atmosphere between us had thickened with the weight of silence. His rage, now fully unleashed, was unmistakable, but I could sense his uncertainty. For the first time I had put him on the defensive, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. The man who had once dominated every situation, who had always been the one pulling the strings, was now grasping at straws, trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation he could no longer manage. I watched him as he stood there, visibly trembling with frustration, his fists clenched at his sides. His usual composure was gone, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a sharp pang of satisfaction. He had underestimated me. He had thought that I was just another part of his life to control, a passive player in the game he had been running for so long. But now the power had shifted, and I was the one who held the upper hand. You don't know what you're doing, he spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. You think you can just destroy everything we've built? Everything I've worked for? I took a step closer to him, deliberately slow, careful to maintain the control that was now mine. What have we really built, exactly? A life where I have no voice. Where everything I do is controlled by you, even down to the smallest detail. He recoiled at the accusation, but I could see the truth of it in his eyes. He had built his empire on the back of others' submission, and I had been one of his most loyal subjects. That was about to change. His eyes narrowed, his arrogance returning in waves as he tried to regain his composure. You're making a huge mistake. I will make sure you regret this. You think you've won, but you haven't even begun to understand what you're up against. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious. What exactly do you think you can do? I'm not afraid of you anymore. A low laugh escaped his lips, the sound cruel and mocking. You have no idea what I'm capable of, do you? You think just because you've secured a few investments behind my back you've won? It's cute. But it's not the real fight. You think you're walking away from this marriage with everything intact? Think again. My stomach twisted, but not with fear. No, there was no fear anymore. What he was saying, though, had a distinct air of danger, one that made me pause for a moment. Had I underestimated him? Was there something I hadn't accounted for in my plan? I couldn't allow myself to become distracted by doubt now. Not when I was so close to securing my future, to making sure I never had to rely on him again. I don't need your permission to leave, I said, my voice quiet but filled with an unwavering certainty. And as for your threats, I'm not worried. Not anymore. His eyes flickered with frustration, and for a moment, it seemed as though he was about to lash out. But then something shifted in his gaze. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I noticed it. He was recalculating, weighing his options. The panic had not fully left him, but he was trying to find a way to regain the upper hand. You're making a mistake, he repeated, this time with a more calculated tone. You think you're just going to walk out of here with all of your investments, your new life? It's not that simple. You don't know what's waiting for you when you try to go public with this. It'll ruin you. No one will believe you. No one will stand by you. The words stung, but I refused to show it. He was trying to intimidate me again, but this time it wouldn't work. I had spent too long carefully building my escape plan, securing my independence and ensuring that I would never be at his mercy again. I had prepared for this moment. You're wrong, I replied coolly, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I've already taken care of everything. There are people in my corner now. People you can't control. I'm not alone in this anymore. His face shifted again, this time to something darker. There was no longer any pretense of politeness or calculated charm. Now he was just a man whose empire was beginning to crumble, struggling to hold on to the one thing that had once given him all his power. Control over me. You really think anyone's going to believe you over me? He sneered, stepping forward as if to physically intimidate me. You think you can just go public and make me out to be the villain? No one will care. You'll be nothing. Your reputation will be destroyed before you even get the chance to speak your truth. But it wasn't his words that unsettled me now. It was the desperation, the thinly veiled panic behind his eyes that betrayed his outward arrogance. He wasn't just trying to scare me. He was scared. He was afraid of losing everything, of being exposed for the manipulator that he truly was. And I could see that now, clearly for the first time. The truth of who he really was, what he had done to me and countless others, had always been there. But it had taken this confrontation, this battle for control, to make me realize how truly powerless he had become in the face of my resolve. You're right, I said suddenly, my voice cold. I don't need anyone to believe me. I don't need anyone to save me. I've already taken steps to make sure my future is secure, and no one can take that from me. Not even you. His face contorted, and for the briefest of moments I saw a flicker of fear, the kind that only comes when someone realizes they've been defeated. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. There was nothing left he could say that would change the course of what was happening. I was no longer the woman he had married, the woman who had been afraid to stand up for herself, afraid of the consequences. I had transformed into something stronger. Someone who was no longer dependent on him, no longer bound by his manipulation. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own life, my independence, and my power. It was about showing him that I didn't need him to define me. I think you've said enough, I said with a finality that left no room for argument. This marriage is over. And you've lost. For a long moment there was only silence between us. I stood tall, watching him as he struggled to process everything I had just said. And in that silence I knew that I had won. He had lost his grip on me and there was nothing he could do to get it back. The silence between us felt thick, oppressive, almost suffocating. I stood there facing him, the man I had once believed was my partner. The man I had trusted with my heart, my life, my future. Yet in this moment I realized how wrong I had been. The power had shifted. He no longer held the reins and there was no turning back. His anger was palpable, but now there was something else behind his eyes. A glimmer of fear. It was as if he finally understood that he had miscalculated. The walls he had so carefully built around me had crumbled, leaving me standing free, exposed, but undeniably empowered. He had tried to control every aspect of my life. My finances, my decisions, my very sense of self. But now he was helpless. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, the way his hands trembled just slightly. He had thought he could break me, but instead he had unknowingly created the woman standing before him now. A woman with a plan, a woman who would no longer bend to his will. I watched him carefully, my gaze steady and unwavering. He was fumbling now, trying to figure out how to regain the control he had lost, but it was clear that he had no idea how to navigate this new dynamic. His usual sharp, authoritative demeanor was faltering. The facade of invulnerability was cracking, piece by piece. He had never considered that I could rise above him, that I could take back my power, and now he was facing the consequences of that arrogance. "You think you've won?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration, though there was something else there now, something like desperation. "You think you've beaten me? You think this is the end?" I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. The truth was already there, hanging in the air between us, loud and clear. He had underestimated me. He had always thought I was just another piece of the puzzle, a convenient part of his empire, a role he could mold to his liking. But I wasn't a part of his puzzle anymore. I had broken free of his influence, and no amount of anger or manipulation could put the pieces back together. I wasn't his to control anymore. I took a slow step toward him, my expression calm but firm. "This isn't about winning or losing," I said, my voice low but filled with quiet strength. "This is about taking control of my life. Something you never let me do." His eyes flickered, the anger rising once again, but there was no fire behind it, only a shallow attempt to maintain his authority. "You're making a mistake. You're throwing everything away. All the years we've spent together, everything we've built. You can't just walk away from it all." I almost laughed at the absurdity of his words. Everything we had built? The years we spent together? It had never been a partnership. It had always been a one-sided arrangement where his needs, his desires, his control had come first. I had sacrificed so much for the sake of this marriage, for the sake of maintaining an illusion of happiness. But the truth was, I had been suffocating, drowning under the weight of his demands, his expectations. I had been living in a gilded cage and now I was finally free. "You never built anything for me," I said, my voice tinged with bitterness. "You built it all for yourself. I was just an accessory, something to fill a role. But not anymore." For the first time I saw a crack in his composure, a brief flicker of vulnerability. He opened his mouth to say something but then stopped. He was trying to find the right words, trying to regain his footing, but it was clear that the ground was shifting beneath him and he didn't know how to stabilize it. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice softer now but with a tone of warning. "You think you can just walk away from this, but it's not that simple. There's a lot more at stake here than you realize." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, to ignore the nagging doubt that tried to creep into my mind. I had come so far and I couldn't afford to second-guess myself now. He had always known how to play on my emotions, how to make me question my worth, my decisions. But not anymore. I wasn't that woman anymore. I had changed and there was no going back. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said quietly, locking eyes with him. "And I'm not afraid." His expression faltered, the frustration turning to something else. Something darker, more dangerous. "You think you're in control?" he hissed, his voice low. "You think you can just walk away with everything, with your little investments and your so-called independence? I'll make sure you regret this. I'll destroy you." The threat hung in the air between us, but it didn't have the same effect it once would have. The fear I might have felt before, the panic that used to consume me in the face of his wrath, had been replaced by something else entirely: certainty. I knew now that no matter what he said or did, I was in control. I had already secured my future. I had already built the foundation for my new life, one that didn't rely on him or his manipulative ways. "You don't scare me anymore," I said, the words sharp and final. "You don't have the power to control me. Not anymore." The words seemed to land like a slap to the face. His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of true uncertainty in them. He had always been the one with the upper hand, the one who called the shots, who made the rules. But now the game had changed. He was no longer the one in control. The fear that I had once seen in him was now palpable, as though he was beginning to realize that he had lost. "Do you really think it's that easy?" he asked again, his voice barely a whisper but with an edge of desperation now. "Do you really think you can just walk away and leave me with nothing?" I shook my head slowly, the smile on my face small but full of quiet triumph. "I don't need to leave you with nothing," I said. "You've already given me everything I need. And I'm walking away with everything I deserve." There was nothing more to say. The battle had been fought and I had won. As I stood there watching him struggle with the reality of it all, I realized that this moment wasn't just about me walking away from him. It was about reclaiming myself, my life, and my future. And in that moment I knew that no matter what happened next, I was no longer afraid. The weight of his stunned silence stretched out in the room like a thick fog, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook just yet. He stood there, rooted to the spot, his mind racing to catch up with the truth that had just been revealed to him. His eyes were wide, pupils darting around as if searching for a way out, some angle he could use to regain the power he had so carefully hoarded over the years. But there was no escape now. The game had changed and he was on the losing side. I watched him carefully, a quiet satisfaction bubbling up in my chest as I saw the color drain from his face. It wasn't about victory for me anymore. It was about liberation. I was finally free of the hold he had on me for so long, and in that freedom I had reclaimed my sense of self, my autonomy. I had fought for it in ways he couldn't have imagined, and now I had everything I needed to build a new life. One that didn't revolve around him or his cruel manipulations. "You didn't see this coming, did you?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with an edge. "You thought you controlled everything, every move I made, every penny I spent, every decision I made. But you missed one thing." He looked up at me, his jaw clenched, eyes narrowing as if trying to summon some semblance of authority. "You think I'll just let you take everything?" His words were sharp but they lacked conviction. The desperation in his voice was a clear sign of the fear creeping in, slowly but surely. "You think I'll just sit back and watch you walk away with everything?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. I had spent too many years allowing him to dictate the terms of my life, allowing him to convince me that I was nothing without him. But now I knew the truth: he was nothing without me. He had tried to erase me, to diminish my worth, to make me believe that I was merely an accessory to his success. But the reality was, I had always been the one who held the power. It had just taken me a long time to realize it. "You don't get to dictate anything anymore," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "I've already made sure of that." His eyes flickered, a brief flash of panic dancing behind them as he processed my words. He had always been the one with the final say, the one who made the rules, but now the script had flipped. He was no longer in control, and I could see it in the way he stood there, unable to fully grasp the enormity of what had just happened. "You're not the one in charge here," I continued, my voice dropping lower. "I've already taken the steps to secure my future. Everything I need is already in place. You're too late to stop me." His face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about? What steps? What future?" I smiled inwardly at the simplicity of his question. He had never even considered that I could plan for myself. In his mind, I had always been a follower, someone who would simply go along with whatever he decided. But I had outgrown that role long ago. And now, I was about to reveal the full extent of the steps I had taken to ensure that I would never again be dependent on him or anyone else. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table between us. His eyes widened as he saw the official-looking documents inside. "What is this?" he asked, his voice now tinged with a mix of curiosity and growing trepidation. "Do you really think I would trust you with my future?" I asked, my eyes never leaving his. "These are the contracts I've secured. Investments, properties, business ventures. All in my name. They're untouchable." Every step I've taken has been calculated to ensure that no matter what happens, I'll walk away with everything I need to build my own life. A life without you. I could see his breathing quicken, the realization settling in. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he said nothing, seemingly too stunned to react. This was the moment when he truly understood just how thoroughly I had planned for this. He had thought he could control me, that he could trap me in a corner and force me into compliance. But I wasn't the naive woman I had been when I first met him. I had learned. I had grown. And now I was finally in control of my own destiny. "You've been playing a dangerous game," I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice steady and cold. "But the truth is, you were never the mastermind. I was. You just didn't see it." His face was a mixture of disbelief and anger now, his thoughts clearly spiraling. I could see him trying to find a way to regain some measure of control, to turn the situation back in his favor. But it was too late. The pieces had already fallen into place and he was no longer the one calling the shots. "You think you've won?" he asked again, this time his voice more brittle, as if the idea of losing was something he could hardly bear. "You think you can just walk away, leaving me with nothing?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "I don't want anything from you. I just want my freedom. And I've already taken the steps to ensure I get it." His eyes were wild now, searching my face for any sign of hesitation, any crack in my resolve. But there was none. I had come too far, fought too hard, and sacrificed too much to let him pull me back into his web. This was the end of the road for us. "I've been patient," I said, my voice dropping even lower. "But now it's over. I've already made the arrangements and I'm walking away. You can try to destroy my reputation, ruin my name, but it won't matter. The foundation I've built is stronger than anything you can throw at me." The finality of my words seemed to hit him like a slap to the face. His expression faltered, a flicker of fear crossing his features before he quickly masked it with anger. But it was too late. I had already won. "You'll regret this," he muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing in frustration. I shook my head slowly. "No. You'll regret underestimating me. You'll regret thinking you could control me." There was nothing more to say. The last remnants of his control had slipped through his fingers, and now he was left standing there, realizing just how thoroughly I had outsmarted him. The marriage was over, the battle had been won, and my future was secure. I was free. The room was heavy with the scent of the air freshener, but it did little to mask the tension that had settled in the space. It was as though the walls themselves were closing in around me, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if it was a mistake to feel so calm. The world outside felt far away, muted by the hum of my own thoughts. I had done it. I had taken back my life, secured my future, and torn down everything that had kept me shackled to him. But even with the victory in my hands, there was still a shadow hanging over me. I had to remind myself that it wasn't just the end of the marriage. It was the beginning of something new, something free. The weight of the past few years had been a constant companion, one I had fought to push away. But now that the battle was over, the dust was settling and I had to face the consequences of everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed to get to this point. There was a knock at the door, interrupting my thoughts. I stood still for a moment, the sudden sound like a jolt to my system. Who could it be? My fingers tightened around the edge of the table as I hesitated. Slowly I made my way to the door and opened it. Standing in front of me was a lawyer, his expression unreadable but serious. He had been one of the people I had consulted early on, helping me put everything in place. "I thought you might want to hear this," he said, handing me a folder, his voice low but firm. "I've just received confirmation from the court. The papers have been filed and the settlement has been agreed upon. It's all official now. You're free." I stared at the folder for a moment, the words written in ink on the page telling me what I had known in my heart. It was done. The divorce was final. The prenup I had worked so hard to turn in my favor had been accepted, and now I held the key to my future. Yet the relief I thought would come wasn't as instantaneous as I had hoped. There was still a gnawing sense of unease, a feeling that the fight was far from over. The lawyer seemed to sense my hesitation. "I understand this is a big moment," he said. "But you need to know you're not just walking away with assets and investments. You've made sure that the future you're building for yourself is completely independent. No one can take that from you now." I nodded slowly, my throat tight. I had built this life with my own hands, making careful decisions and watching my every step. But now, as I held the official papers in my hands, I felt the enormity of the choice I had made. The past few months had been a whirlwind of meetings, careful planning, and covert strategies. I had been focused on winning, on making sure I had a clear path ahead of me. But now, as the lawyer turned to leave, I realized just how alone I felt. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, cutting through the silence. The sudden sound was jarring, but I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. It was him. My ex-husband. I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to read it. I didn't need to read it. But curiosity got the better of me and I picked up the phone. Don't think this is over. I'll make sure you regret everything. No one will believe your lies. I'll make sure of it. The words on the screen were as venomous as I had imagined, and for a moment, I felt a flash of anger rise up inside me. He thought he could still control me from a distance, still make me feel small, insignificant. But I didn't have to react. I had already won. His words didn't hold power over me anymore. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly, reminding myself that the end of this marriage was my victory, not his. But as much as I told myself I was done with him, the lingering effects of the years we spent together began to surface. I had been through so much to break free from his control, and now the reality of it hit me in waves. The emotional toll had been steep, and while I had achieved financial independence, I knew there was more work to be done. It wasn't just the business ventures or investments that mattered now. It was about rebuilding myself from the inside out. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I worked with my lawyer to ensure the final details were squared away, signing off on everything that needed to be done. As much as I had taken the steps to protect myself, there was still the nagging feeling that I wasn't quite free. It was during one of those long meetings with my lawyer that I found out the next piece of the puzzle. My ex-husband hadn't just been sending those nasty messages to me. He had also been trying to manipulate the people around me, trying to convince my friends and acquaintances that I had been the one in the wrong. He had been planting seeds of doubt in their minds, hoping to turn them against me. But his efforts were fruitless. The people who mattered, the ones who had always supported me, stood by my side. His influence had never been as strong as he had believed it to be. "Don't let him get to you," my lawyer said as we sat in his office reviewing the next steps. "He's lashing out because he's losing. You've done everything right and now he's just trying to hold on to the little power he has left." I nodded, grateful for the reassurance, but there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that this battle wasn't quite over. There would be more hurdles to jump over, more challenges ahead. I had no illusion that the road ahead would be easy. The legal side of things might have been settled, but the emotional aftermath, the healing, would take time. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt the weight of the past few months start to shift. It was no longer about fighting for my independence. That was already secured. Now it was about rebuilding my life, finding new meaning and moving forward without looking back. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The world ahead seemed full of endless possibilities. My investments, my plans, everything I had worked for, were all the foundation I needed to begin a new chapter. I had proven to myself that I was capable of more than just being a passive participant in my own life. I had found my strength, and now it was time to live fully with no more apologies, no more second-guessing. The journey was far from over, but I was ready to walk it with my head held high, knowing that I had finally secured my own future. The sun was setting on a new chapter of my life, and as I stood there watching the soft glow of orange and pink fill the sky, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over me. It was strange to think about how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Just months ago, I had felt like a prisoner in my own life, suffocating under the weight of expectations, manipulation, and fear. Now, standing on the precipice of something new, I couldn't help but marvel at how far I had come. The divorce had been the catalyst for my transformation, but it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I had walked away from everything I had known, everything I had been forced to accept, and in its place I had built something stronger. I had built a life on my own terms, and while the road had been long and difficult, the reward was immeasurable. The freedom, the independence, the peace, I had earned it all. But with all the victories, there was still the weight of the aftermath to contend with. It wasn't just about moving on from the marriage. It was about healing, rebuilding, and learning how to live fully again. I couldn't ignore the emotional scars, the years of emotional manipulation that still lingered in the corners of my mind. The power dynamics we had lived with for so long didn't disappear overnight. There were days when the past would catch up to me, when the memories would surface, threatening to drag me back into the shadows. But I had learned how to face those memories, how to sit with them and let them pass. I had learned how to take control of my narrative and rewrite it. No longer would I let him define who I was, what I was capable of, or what my future would look like. My life was mine again, and that meant I had the power to shape it however I saw fit. It wasn't easy, of course. The world didn't just hand you a fresh start because you decided you wanted one. There were people who didn't understand, people who doubted me, who questioned my choices. My ex-husband's attempts to destroy my reputation were still echoing in the background, as he continued to try and manipulate the people around me. His bitterness had only grown, but his attempts to tear me down had grown weaker with every passing day. The more I stood in my truth, the less power he had over me. In a way, his efforts only solidified my conviction. They reminded me that I was on the right path. If he was this threatened by my freedom, then I must have been doing something right. I had been silenced for so long, made to believe that I was nothing without him. And now I was watching him unravel as I flourished. I had taken steps to secure my financial future, ensuring that no matter what happened, I would never have to depend on anyone else again. It wasn't just the investments, the properties, or the business ventures that mattered. It was the strength I had found within myself. The ability to trust my own instincts. The courage to choose my own path no matter how difficult it seemed. I spent hours planning for the future, making sure that I wasn't just surviving but thriving. I reconnected with old friends, ones I had distanced myself from over the years because I had been so focused on keeping the peace with my ex-husband. I found hobbies that reignited my passion, hobbies that had been lost in the chaos of trying to please someone else. I spent time traveling, exploring new places and rediscovering the world through my own eyes. I had forgotten how much beauty there was in life outside of the confines of my marriage. But even as I moved forward, there were moments when the scars still burned. I had spent so many years being treated like I didn't matter, like my voice wasn't worth hearing. It would take time to undo the damage that had been done. The emotional battles, the years of feeling like I was invisible would take time to heal. But I was no longer afraid of the work. I had spent too long afraid of confronting the truth, of standing in the discomfort of the pain. But now I knew that embracing those emotions was the key to truly moving forward. And then, there were the unexpected moments. The moments when I would feel a sense of peace and pride that I never thought I would experience again. Like when I signed the last of the paperwork, the final step in severing my ties to the past, and realized that I was no longer tied to someone who had held me back for so long. Or when I received a message from a friend I had reconnected with, a message of support and encouragement that reminded me how much I had to offer the world. Those moments were the ones that made the pain worth it. The small victories, the everyday moments of joy, the realization that I was not just surviving but actually living. I was not the woman I had been when I walked into that marriage, broken and uncertain. I was stronger, more self-assured, and more confident than I had ever been. In a way, my ex-husband had done me a favor. He had forced me to confront the deepest parts of myself, the parts one had buried for too long. And in that confrontation I had discovered something powerful, my own resilience. I had learned that I could trust myself, that I could navigate life on my own terms. I walked into the future knowing that I would face challenges, that there would be days when the old scars would ache. But I also knew that I had the strength to face those challenges head-on, to take them in stride and keep moving forward. I wasn't looking back anymore. I was too busy creating the life I had always deserved. The past was behind me, but the future stretched out in front of me, filled with endless possibilities. And this time I was in control. The future wasn't just something that happened to me, it was something I was shaping with every decision, every step I took. This was my new beginning. And I was ready. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a golden hue across the pristine marble countertops. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed tea, my only solace in this household. As I reached for my cup, a daily ritual I clung to for a shred of normalcy, something felt different. The ceramic was warm against my palm, yet beneath it, a small slip of paper peeked out. My brows knitted together as I pulled it free. "Hope you enjoy your last sip." The words, scrawled in uneven handwriting, sent a slow chill down my spine. My pulse quickened, but my face remained neutral. I had long learned that showing weakness in this house was akin to inviting disaster. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate breath and exhaled as if nothing had happened. If this was meant to shake me, it wouldn't. Not today. Every story has power, and so does your support. Subscribe for more gripping tales that inspire and captivate. It's free and helps us keep this community thriving. Now let's dive in. The clinking of dishes and muffled conversation filled the space around me. My mother-in-law sat across the table, eyes sharp as ever, watching my every move like a hawk circling its prey. Her presence was suffocating, a constant reminder that I was never truly welcome in this house, despite the ring on my finger. My sister-in-law, just as cruel but with a sharper tongue, sat beside her, scrolling through her phone with an air of disinterest. I turned the cup in my hands, my fingers tracing its rim, feigning contemplation. Then, with an unbothered smile, I gently set it down in front of my mother-in-law. "Why don't you have it today?" My voice was light, casual, as if offering a simple act of kindness. Her gaze flickered to mine, then to the cup. A flash of something, was it hesitation? Crossed her face before she scoffed. "Do I look like I need your pity?" Before I could respond, my sister-in-law snatched the cup with a smirk. "Please. If anyone deserves the first sip, it's me." My breath hitched for just a moment, but I masked it quickly. This wasn't part of the plan. I had expected my mother-in-law to react, to question, maybe even to refuse. But her daughter? She was impulsive, arrogant, and that would be her downfall. She raised the cup to her lips, the steam curling around her face, and took a slow, deliberate sip. I watched, waiting. My heart pounded in a rhythm I refused to acknowledge. The moment stretched, each second pressing against my chest like a weight. Then she paused. Her brows knitted together, her lips parting slightly as if tasting something unexpected. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, gone as quickly as it appeared. She set the cup down, her fingers tightening around the handle. "What is this?" Her voice carried an edge now, suspicion lacing her words. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" She stared at me as if searching for something beneath my composed exterior. My mother-in-law leaned forward, her sharp gaze darting between us. "Well, what's wrong with it?" "I don't know," my sister-in-law murmured, licking her lips as though trying to place the strange sensation. "It just tastes off." A slow smile curled at the edges of my lips. Subtle, unreadable. "Strange," I mused, reaching for the cup again. "Maybe I should try it." She jerked it away before I could, her grip tightening. "No." A quiet beat of silence passed between us. I saw it then, the uncertainty creeping into her features, the unspoken fear slipping beneath her bravado. The note had done its job. She was second-guessing herself. My mother-in-law, however, was less impressed. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, reaching for the cup herself. "You're just being dramatic." But my sister-in-law hesitated, holding it just out of reach. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching. I gave her nothing. No confirmation, no denial. Just a quiet, knowing look. She swallowed hard. Then, in a sudden movement, she pushed the cup away, the contents sloshing slightly over the rim. "I don't want it anymore." I leaned back, my fingers tracing the edge of my plate, barely concealing my satisfaction. "What's the matter?" I asked, my voice soft, amused even. She scowled. "Nothing." But I knew better. The power dynamic had shifted. For the first time, there was hesitation in her actions, a crack in her unwavering arrogance. And that was all I needed. My mother-in-law let out an exasperated sigh, clearly unimpressed with her daughter's sudden paranoia. "Honestly, the both of you are unbearable," she muttered, reaching for her own tea instead. I watched as she took a slow sip, completely unaware of the invisible battle that had just taken place. The room settled again, conversation returning to mundane topics. But beneath the surface something had changed. A seed of doubt had been planted. And doubt was a powerful thing. I glanced down at the slip of paper still resting on my lap. This was just the beginning. The day passed as usual, or at least that's how it appeared. My sister-in-law avoided my gaze, her unease palpable. My mother-in-law remained her usual self, unbothered, arrogant, convinced that she still held all the power in this house. But I knew better. That evening, as I cleared the dining table, I noticed something. My sister-in-law's cup remained untouched since breakfast. She had switched to water, her tea abandoned. I smiled to myself. Fear is a funny thing. It doesn't need to be real. It just needs to be believable. As I rinsed the dishes, I felt a presence behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I let the silence stretch, waiting. Then her voice, low, uncertain. What was in it? I let the water run, my fingers tapping idly against the sink. Then finally I turned to face her. In what? I asked, feigning confusion. She glared at me, though the fear behind her eyes was evident. Don't play games. What was in it? I stepped closer, watching as she instinctively took a half step back. And then I smiled. I don't know what you're talking about. Her breath hitched, her fingers twitching at her sides. For the first time she had no words. And that, I realized, was more satisfying than anything else. As I turned off the sink and walked past her, I heard her shaky exhale behind me. She was afraid now. Good. Because this was only the first sip. As I walked away from my sister-in-law, leaving her trapped in the web of her own paranoia, a quiet satisfaction curled in my chest. She had always been the one to sneer, to humiliate, to dismiss me as nothing more than an outsider in this house. And yet, with nothing but a well-placed note and the power of suggestion, I had managed to turn the tables. The real beauty of it? I hadn't needed to lift a finger. By the time dinner rolled around, the energy in the house had shifted. It was subtle, just a ripple beneath the surface. But I felt it in the way my sister-in-law kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. In the way she reached for her glass of water instead of the steaming cup of tea set before her. My mother-in-law, oblivious to the unspoken battle between us, remained her usual self, imposing, critical, and entirely too convinced of her own importance. Are you seriously not drinking your tea? She asked, her voice sharp as she eyed her daughter. What nonsense is this now? My sister-in-law stiffened, her fingers tightening around her fork. For a second I wondered if she would say something, if she would dare voice the creeping suspicion gnawing at the edges of her mind. But she was smart enough to know that speaking up without proof would only invite ridicule. It's too hot, she muttered instead, pushing the cup further away. I almost laughed. She was unraveling faster than I'd expected. The rest of the meal was uneventful on the surface. But beneath it I could feel the tension simmering. My mother-in-law, growing increasingly impatient, directed most of her sharp remarks at me. My husband, silent as ever, ate without acknowledging my presence. He was a spectator in this house, never one to intervene, never one to question. And yet I caught him watching me tonight. It was a fleeting glance, barely noticeable, but it was there. After dinner I retreated to our bedroom, closing the door behind me with a quiet click. The night outside was calm, the kind of stillness that should have brought peace. But in this house, silence was never truly silent. It was filled with unsaid words, buried grudges, and ghosts of arguments long since past. As I changed into something more comfortable, the door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I know you did something. My sister-in-law's voice was barely above a whisper, but the accusation in it was razor-sharp. I sighed, rubbing my temples before facing her. You sound paranoid. Her jaw clenched. You think you're clever, don't you? I tilted my head, studying her. Her confidence was fraying at the edges, her usual smugness replaced with unease. If I had done something, I said, voice deliberately slow, wouldn't you feel it by now? Her face paled just slightly. I took a step closer, watching as she tensed. The funny thing about fear, I continued, my voice soft but laced with something heavier, is that it doesn't need to be real. It just needs to feel real. Her breath hitched. For a second, just a second, I saw something I had never seen in her before. Doubt. She stormed out without another word. I exhaled, turning back to the mirror. The face staring back at me was calm, composed. But inside my mind was whirring. The pieces were shifting into place. My sister-in-law was the weakest link, and I had found the first crack in the foundation. Now all I had to do was widen it. The next morning I found my mother-in-law in the kitchen, her lips pressed into a thin line as she stared at the countertop. Something was wrong. I took a slow step forward, glancing at the table. And then I saw it. A single white cup. My cup. And beneath it? Another note. My pulse remained steady, my expression unreadable. But inside something flickered. I didn't leave that note. I lifted the cup slowly, fingers steady despite the storm brewing beneath my skin. The note was shorter this time. Not everything is as it seems. The handwriting was different. Neater, more deliberate. I didn't react. I didn't let the question forming in my mind show on my face. Instead, I turned to my mother-in-law, feigning indifference. She was watching me closely, her eyes sharp. "Do you think this is funny?" she asked, voice laced with irritation. I raised a brow. "Why would I find this funny?" She scoffed, crossing her arms. "I don't have time for games. If you think you can—" I didn't leave this. I cut her off, my tone even. Her eyes narrowed. Silence stretched between us. Then from behind us my sister-in-law's voice rang out. I saw her do it. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression set in forced confidence. I almost smiled. So this was her move. Lies were always the first resort of the desperate. My mother-in-law turned to me expectant. I met her gaze without flinching. "And what exactly did you see?" My sister-in-law's lips parted, as if realizing too late that she hadn't thought this through. She hesitated. "I saw you put the note there." I tilted my head. "Did you?" She faltered. My mother-in-law, growing impatient, sighed. "I don't care who did what. I just wanted to stop." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because in that moment I saw it. My sister-in-law wasn't just afraid anymore. She was unraveling. I turned, walking away without another word. Let them stew in their own uncertainty. Because now the game had truly begun. Later that night I found another note. This one tucked beneath my pillow. I unfolded it slowly, my heartbeat steady. "Check your tea tomorrow morning." A shiver ran down my spine. Not out of fear. Out of anticipation. Because someone else was playing now. And I was going to find out who. I held the note in my hands, my fingers tracing the edges of the paper as my mind raced. "Check your tea tomorrow morning." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. Someone else was playing now. Someone who knew enough to insert themselves into the unfolding chaos. I wasn't sure what unsettled me more. The fact that I wasn't the only one orchestrating this silent war, or the lingering question of who had written the note. My mother-in-law? Unlikely. She thrived on direct confrontation, her insults sharp as a blade. My sister-in-law? Perhaps. But this wasn't her style. She was unraveling, but she wasn't cunning. Not like this. That left one possibility. I turned my gaze toward the closed bedroom door. My husband. A slow exhale left my lips. For years I had learned to live with his silence. The way he let his family tear into me without so much as a word. The way he turned his head when I was humiliated, when I was treated like an outsider in my own home. And yet, something about his gaze last night, the way he had watched me at the dinner table, the flicker of something behind his eyes, had stuck with me. Could it be him? I placed the note on the nightstand, turning off the lamp. Sleep didn't come easily, not with the weight of anticipation pressing against my ribs. My mind spun through the possibilities, threading together loose ends, but the answer remained elusive. Morning arrived with an eerie sense of calm. I followed my usual routine, making my way to the kitchen as though nothing had changed. My mother-in-law was already seated, sipping her tea with her usual air of self-importance. My sister-in-law sat across from her, avoiding my gaze. The cup of tea in front of her remained untouched. And then there was my husband. He stood near the counter, pretending to be busy with his phone. I could feel his attention even without looking at him directly. Keeping my movements measured, I reached for my cup. My fingers wrapped around the handle, lifting it slowly. The tea was as it always was, warm, fragrant, harmless. But that was the problem. It was too normal. If this were any other day, I wouldn't have thought twice. But today, after the note, well, there was something here. Something unseen. I set the cup down deliberately as though savoring the moment. My mother-in-law arched an eyebrow. "Not drinking?" I smiled. "I will." And then, before anyone could react, I turned the cup ever so slightly, just enough to spill a few drops onto the white tablecloth. The liquid pooled, seeping into the fabric. Silence. It lasted no more than a second, but in that second I caught the shift. My husband's fingers twitched ever so slightly. My sister-in-law inhaled sharply, then masked it with a cough. My mother-in-law remained unaffected, but I had never expected her to react. She wasn't the one playing the game. But someone here was. Casually I reached for a napkin, dabbing at the spill. "Clumsy of me," I murmured. No one spoke. And that was all the confirmation I needed. The tea had been tampered with. The question was, how? And more importantly, why? My mind moved quickly, piecing things together. My husband had been distant lately, but not in the usual way. It wasn't just disinterest anymore. It was something else. Calculating. My sister-in-law had been erratic, her paranoia growing with each passing day. But would she really have the nerve to go this far? I glanced at my husband again, watching as he scrolled absently through his phone, though his thumb wasn't moving. Was this his attempt at taking control? A warning? A test? I decided to push. I reached for the cup again, lifting it toward my lips, watching him from the corner of my eye. The reaction was immediate. His shoulders tensed, his eyes flicking toward me for the briefest second before shifting away. There was that flicker of something beneath his carefully composed expression. I set the cup down without drinking, my fingers curling around the handle. Game on. The rest of breakfast passed in silence, but beneath it, a storm brewed. My sister-in-law still refused to drink her tea, her fingers drumming against the table, a nervous habit I had never noticed before. My mother-in-law continued as though nothing was amiss, but she was watching. Always watching. And my husband? He remained quiet. Too quiet. When the table was cleared and the dishes washed, I found myself alone in the kitchen. Or so I thought. You knew, didn't you? The voice was low, controlled. I turned, finding my husband standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I tilted my head slightly. Knew what? His jaw tightened. Don't play games with me. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch. Then I smiled. You were testing me. His lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. He didn't deny it. I took a slow step forward. Why? He exhaled through his nose, running a hand through his hair. For the first time in a long time, there was something real in his expression. A flicker of uncertainty. You've changed, he said finally. I let out a quiet laugh. You're just now noticing? His eyes darkened. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. So tell me, husband, I murmured, what exactly was in my tea this morning? He hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. There hadn't been anything in the tea. Not poison. Not anything dangerous. Just doubt. He had planted the seed just as I had done with my sister-in-law. He wanted to see if I would drink it. If I would hesitate. If I would flinch. I hadn't. I reached out, brushing my fingers against his arm. You're trying to understand me, I mused, tilting my head. But here's the thing. He swallowed. I don't think you ever really knew me at all. His breath caught for just a second. And then I walked past him, leaving him standing there, drowning in the realization. I didn't need to test him, as I had already won. But there was still one more move to make. One final sip to take. And I would make sure they all watched. I walked away from my husband, leaving him standing in the dimly lit hallway with nothing but his own thoughts. He wanted to understand me now, but it was too late for that. For years he had allowed his family to tear me down, picking at my existence like vultures circling prey. And now, only when the scales had shifted, did he start to look at me differently. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into this house all those years ago, desperate for approval, for a place to belong. That woman had been fragile, easily dismissed. This woman, she was something else entirely. And they were just beginning to realize it. Morning came heavy with unspoken tension. The house carried a stillness, an unnatural quiet that pressed against the walls like an impending storm. I moved through my routine as if nothing had changed, but I could feel the weight of their gazes, watching, waiting. My sister-in-law lingered near the doorway, pretending to check her phone, but her eyes flickered toward me every few seconds. My mother-in-law sat at the dining table, her usual mask of indifference in place, but there was a stiffness in her shoulders. And my husband? He was already seated, staring at the cup of tea set before him. I took my seat, my fingers tracing the rim of my own cup. The air felt thick, like something unspoken was crawling between us, unseen but undeniable. I could sense the hesitation, the wariness in their movements. Good. They were exactly where I wanted them. With deliberate slowness, I lifted my cup, letting the steam curl into the air. I felt them watching, waiting for me to hesitate, to show some flicker of uncertainty. But I didn't. Instead, I brought the cup to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The silence was deafening. I set the cup down gently, the sound of porcelain against wood almost deafening in the heavy quiet. Then I exhaled, a soft, satisfied sound, as if the tea tasted no different than any other morning. As it didn't. I had known from the moment I lifted the cup. The temperature, the scent, it was exactly as it always had been. No bitterness, no unusual taste. Nothing had been done to my tea. But they didn't know that. And that was the real game. My sister-in-law shifted in her seat, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. My mother-in-law's expression remained carefully neutral, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. And my husband, oh, he was the most telling of all. His knuckles were white against the table, his jaw tight. I tilted my head slightly. Something wrong. His eyes flicked to mine, and in that second I saw it. Doubt. For the first time he was the one questioning everything. Not me. Not the power structure of this house that had remained unchallenged for years. No, this time it was them who were off balance. And I was the one pulling the strings. I reached for the sugar bowl, stirring a small spoonful into my tea with practiced ease. You're all so quiet this morning, I mused, watching the liquid swirl golden and warm. It's unusual. No one responded. The silence stretched, tense and suffocating. Then finally my sister-in-law broke. You drank it. Her voice was barely above a whisper, laced with something almost like disbelief. I arched a brow. Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, her fingers tapping restlessly against the table. My mother-in-law, ever composed, leaned back in her chair. No reason. But her voice was too careful, too measured. They had expected me to hesitate, to falter. I had done neither. I took another sip, slower this time, watching them from the corner of my eye. You all seem tense, I commented, setting the cup down again. My husband exhaled, long and slow. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Enjoying what? His jaw clenched. I let the silence sit between us, stretching out like a taut wire. Then with a soft chuckle I leaned forward slightly. What exactly did you think would happen? No answer. Because they didn't know. They had all expected something, anything, to happen the moment I drank from that cup. Maybe they thought I would hesitate, or worse, that I would accuse them of something. But I hadn't. I had taken a sip without a second thought. And that, more than anything, had shaken them. My sister-in-law suddenly pushed her chair back, the legs scraping against the floor as she stood. I'm going to my room. She practically fled. I watched her go, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. He was cracking. I had planted the seed of doubt, and it was growing, curling around her thoughts like ivy. She wouldn't last much longer. My mother-in-law, to her credit, remained unmoved. You should eat, she said coolly, as if the entire exchange had never happened. But I could see it. The way she avoided looking at me directly. The way her fingers tightened around the handle of her own cup. She was beginning to doubt herself, too. Good. I picked up a piece of toast, taking a slow bite. Delicious, I murmured, watching my husband out of the corner of my eye. His shoulders were rigid, his face unreadable. But I knew him too well. I had shaken something in him, cracked whatever foundation he had built inside his own mind. I was no longer the weak one in this house. And that terrified him. Finishing my tea, I pushed my chair back, standing slowly. Well, I sighed, this was lovely. No one responded. I walked away, leaving them to sit in their own thoughts, their own suspicions. I had won this round. But the game wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. As I left the dining room, I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against a small slip of paper. The note I had found under my pillow the night before. I had checked my tea just as it had instructed. No. Now it was time to find out who had written it. As I walked away from the dining table, the small note still tucked inside my pocket, my mind churned with possibilities. The weight of it against my fingers was heavier than it should have been, as if the words carried something far more significant than a simple warning. Someone had gone out of their way to reach me. But why? And more importantly, who? The quiet creak of the hallway floor beneath my steps was the only sound as I made my way back to the bedroom. My pulse was steady, controlled, but my thoughts raced ahead of me, analyzing every movement, every glance, every hesitation from breakfast. I had learned to read people in this house. It had been a matter of survival. And right now my instincts told me something was shifting. I shut the bedroom door behind me, leaning against it for just a moment. The silence here was different. It wasn't comforting. It was thick with anticipation, with the promise of something waiting to be uncovered. I pulled the note from my pocket, unfolding it carefully. The words stared back at me, simple yet powerful. Check your tea tomorrow morning. Who had written it? It hadn't been my sister-in-law. Her fear was too raw, too reactionary. My mother-in-law? Unlikely. She wielded her cruelty openly, never through whispers in the dark. That left only one real possibility. I turned my head toward the bathroom door where I knew my husband would be. The sound of running water hummed through the space, filling the air with soft static. If he had left the note, what was his endgame? Was it a warning? A test? Or something else entirely? I needed answers. The water stopped, and a moment later the door swung open. My husband stepped out, a towel draped around his neck, droplets of water sliding down his collarbone. He looked up, and for a split second there was something in his gaze. Something unreadable. I held up the note. Did you write this? His expression didn't change, but there was the briefest pause, a flicker of something behind his eyes before he spoke. No. Why? A carefully measured, practiced lie. I stepped closer, watching his reaction. Someone in this house did. He didn't flinch, but I saw the shift in his posture. The slight tension in his shoulders. The way his fingers curled into his towel just for a moment before relaxing. You think it was me? His voice was calm, neutral, but I heard the undercurrent of something else. Something darker. I think, I said slowly, stepping even closer, that you've been watching me. His lips parted slightly, but he didn't deny it. I tilted my head, studying him the way I had studied my in-laws for years. Reading between the lines of what wasn't being said. You wanted to see if I'd drink the tea. That's why you put the note there. You wanted to test me. His silence was the only answer I needed. I exhaled, tucking the note back into my pocket. You were waiting for something to happen, I continued, voice quiet but sharp. You wanted to see if I'd hesitate. If I'd react. He crossed his arms, finally speaking. And you didn't. A smile tugged at the corner of my lips, but it wasn't amusement. No. His gaze was searching now, analyzing me the way I had just done to him. You've changed. You've said that before, I murmured. Because it's true. I let the silence stretch, watching him shift under the weight of it. Then I spoke the words that had been circling my mind since I first found the note. Why do you care? He inhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. Because I don't know what's going to happen next. I raised an eyebrow. And that bothers you? For the first time his carefully constructed composure cracked. It shouldn't it? There was the truth, buried beneath his restraint. He had spent years being indifferent to me, to the way his family treated me. But now, when the power in this house had shifted, when I was the one in control, he finally started paying attention. I stepped even closer, lowering my voice. Are you afraid of me, husband? He didn't answer. But he didn't have to. I reached for the doorknob, pausing just before stepping out. If you leave another note, I murmured, make sure you ask the right question. Then I walked away, leaving him standing there, his uncertainty thick enough to taste in the air. Downstairs the house was quiet, but I knew it wouldn't last. My sister-in-law was unraveling, my mother-in-law was watching, and my husband was questioning everything he thought he knew. Me. I was done playing their game. I was making my own rules now. I found my way to the kitchen, the morning sun casting long shadows across the floor. My hands moved on autopilot, preparing another cup of tea, the motions familiar, practiced. But this time there was no note waiting beneath my cup. I lifted the tea, watching the steam curl into the air. I had control now. Of myself. Of this house. Of them. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Because they had spent years believing I was weak. That I would always be beneath them. That I would never be the one holding the power. But now I had it. And I wasn't letting it go. I took a slow sip, savoring the warmth. Let them wonder. Let them fear. Because this wasn't just about tea anymore. This was war. And I had already won. I sat at the kitchen table, my tea cradled between my hands, its warmth pressing against my palms. The steam curled lazily into the air, swirling like the thoughts racing through my mind. The house was silent now, but it wasn't the kind of peaceful silence that came with comfort. It was the heavy kind. The waiting kind. The kind that stretched tight over everything, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. The balance had shifted. I had felt it the moment I walked away from my husband, leaving him standing in his own uncertainty. He was afraid, though he wouldn't admit it. Not of me necessarily, but of what I had become. of the fact that for the first time he wasn't sure what I would do next. And that terrified him. Good. I lifted my cup and took a slow sip, watching the reflection of the window against the liquid surface. My mother-in-law had always believed she ran this house. She had dictated its rules, controlled its hierarchy, ensured that I always remained at the bottom. My sister-in-law had followed in her footsteps, their cruelty passed down like a family heirloom. My husband had stood on the sidelines, complicit in his silence. But that was over now. A soft creak echoed from the hallway, barely audible, but I caught it. A shift in weight, hesitant footsteps. Someone was watching me. I didn't react. Instead, I set my cup down with deliberate ease, my fingers curling against the porcelain's edge. "You might as well come in," I said, keeping my voice light. Silence. Then after a beat, my sister-in-law stepped into view. She looked different today. Not as put together as usual. Her normally sleek hair was slightly unkempt, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She hadn't been sleeping well. I knew that because I had made sure of it. She lingered by the doorway, arms crossed, but there was no fire in her posture. No sharp-edged confidence. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was quieter than usual, lacking its usual bite. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "Doing what?" She let out a sharp breath as if frustrated with the game. "This. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her sleeves. "You're different." I leaned back in my chair, letting the statement settle. "Maybe I was always like this," I said simply. "Maybe you just never noticed." Her lips pressed together, but she didn't argue. Because deep down she knew I was right. She had spent years dismissing me, treating me as insignificant. She had never once considered that I might be capable of anything beyond enduring her taunts. And now, she was realizing that her ignorance had been her greatest mistake. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Sit." She hesitated but then did. For the first time, there was no smugness in her expression. No superiority. Just quiet, simmering uncertainty. I watched her waiting. And then softly she spoke. "Did you put something in the tea?" The words barely made it past her lips, but they hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up my cup again, letting the warmth seep into my skin. "Would you believe me if I said no?" She swallowed, glancing at my cup then back at me. She didn't answer. And that told me everything I needed to know. I set my tea down once more, leaning forward slightly. "You're afraid?" She stiffened, her jaw tightening. "I'm not." I smiled. "Lying doesn't suit you." She flinched. Just barely. But I caught it. I could see it in her posture, the way she kept glancing at my cup as if expecting something to happen. She didn't know what was real anymore. That was the beauty of fear. It didn't have to be logical. It just had to exist. She was unraveling. And I wasn't done yet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the note, the one I had found under my pillow, the one that had led me to this moment. I slid it across the table toward her. "Did you write this?" Her breath caught as she read the words. "Check your tea tomorrow morning." She looked up at me, genuine confusion flashing across her face. "No," she said, and for the first time I believed her. "Interesting." I leaned back. "Then who did?" She shook her head, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Something close to realization. "You don't think?" She stopped herself, shaking her head again. I narrowed my gaze. "What?" Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "It's just," she hesitated, her hands fisting against her lap. "It's probably nothing." I watched her carefully. "Say it." She exhaled shakily. "Last night before I went to bed I saw Mom." She stopped, correcting herself. "I saw her outside your room." I frowned. "And?" She shifted in her seat. She had something in her hand. A piece of paper. A slow, cold realization settled over me. My mother-in-law. The woman who had spent years making my life unbearable. The woman who never hesitated to insult, to manipulate, to control. The woman who had built this house into a kingdom where she ruled. And I was nothing more than a tolerated inconvenience. She had left the note. But why? My sister-in-law was watching me now, waiting for a reaction. She looked uneasy, as if saying it out loud had made it real. I let out a slow breath, steadying my thoughts. "If she wrote the note," I said carefully, "then that means she wanted me to check the tea." The implication was obvious. She wanted me to know something was off. I glanced down at my cup, my mind working through the possibilities. Had she expected me to hesitate? To panic? Had she been testing me just as my husband had? Or had she been warning me? I looked up, meeting my sister-in-law's gaze. Where is she now? She swallowed, then glanced toward the hallway. Upstairs. In her room. I nodded slowly, pushing my chair back. The storm was breaking, and I was walking straight into it. I moved toward the stairs, my pulse steady but my mind brimming with questions. My mother-in-law had written the note. That much was clear now. But the real question remained. Why? Was she warning me? Testing me? Or was this just another one of her elaborate power plays? A last-ditch effort to reclaim control over a house she no longer ruled? I climbed each step deliberately, my fingers trailing along the wooden railing. The walls of this house had always seemed to whisper, carrying secrets through the hallways like unseen ghosts. But now, for the first time, I was the one in control of the story. As I reached the second floor, the air grew heavier, thick with unspoken words. I could feel it pressing against me like the house itself was holding its breath. My mother-in-law's door was slightly ajar, just enough to suggest an invitation. Or a trap. I stepped inside. She was seated near the window, her posture unnaturally still. A cup of tea rested on the small table beside her, untouched. The moment she heard me, she turned her head slightly, her sharp eyes locking onto mine. You figured it out, she said simply, her voice as smooth as ever. I didn't respond right away. I took a slow step forward, watching her, reading her. She wasn't nervous. If anything, she looked expectant. As if she had been waiting for this moment. You left the note, I said, keeping my voice measured. Her lips curled into a slight smirk. Of course I did. I inhaled, slow and deep, pushing past the irritation that rose in my chest. She was enjoying this. The dance, the game, the tension stretched between us like a wire ready to snap. But I wouldn't let her dictate the pace. Why? I asked. Her smirk didn't falter. Because I needed to know. I narrowed my gaze. Know what? She reached for her cup, swirling the liquid inside without drinking. I needed to know if you had it in you. A slow chill traced its way down my spine, but I didn't let it show. Had what in me? She tilted her head slightly, as if observing a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. The ability to survive. I let out a quiet laugh, devoid of humor. Survive what? She set the cup down and leaned forward just slightly. This house. I watched her carefully, my mind working through her words. Was this some sort of admission? A twisted acknowledgement of the years of torment she had orchestrated? You underestimated me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her expression didn't change. No, she murmured. I watched. I waited. And then I tested. The weight of her words settled over me, a realization clicking into place. This hadn't just been cruelty. This had been a deliberate, calculated process. You wanted me to fight back, I murmured, more to myself than to her. Her smirk deepened. I wanted to see if you would. My fingers curled at my sides. And if I hadn't? She leaned back, her gaze unwavering. Then you never would have belonged here. A slow, creeping anger stirred beneath my ribs, but it was laced with something else. Understanding. She had never wanted a daughter-in-law to mold into obedience. She had wanted an opponent. Someone to challenge her, to prove their worth in the only way she respected, through power. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. You're insane. She chuckled, the sound low and knowing. And yet here you are. Standing. Stronger than ever. I took another step closer, my voice steady. You don't control me anymore. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the truth in my words. But there was something else in her expression. Something unreadable. You think you've won, she mused. I met her gaze head-on. I know I have. A beat of silence stretched between us. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she lifted her cup and took a sip. My breath caught for just a fraction of a second. Because I knew in that moment something was wrong. She set the cup down gently, her fingers resting lightly on the porcelain. I always knew you'd be the one to take my place, she murmured. A slow, creeping unease curled through me. What did you do? She smiled then, a quiet, knowing expression. I made sure you'd remember this moment. My heart pounded. And then, before I could react, she closed her eyes. The cup slipped from her fingers, tipping over, the tea spilling across the table in a slow, golden cascade. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay still to think. I stepped forward quickly, shaking her shoulder. "What did you do?" Her body slumped slightly, but her lips were still curved in that eerie smile. My breath came sharp and fast, my mind racing. Was this real? Was this another trick? I turned toward the door, ready to call for help, but then I stopped. As I saw it, a small slip of paper tucked beneath the edge of the table. With shaking fingers, I pulled it free. One sentence. One final message. "Check my tea tomorrow morning." The room spun. I staggered back, the weight of it pressing down on me. This wasn't over. Not yet. Not by a long shot. The note trembled between my fingers as the room around me shrank into silence. "Check my tea tomorrow morning." The words were simple, yet they pulsed with something deeper. Something calculated, deliberate. My mother-in-law had planned this, right down to the moment her fingers loosened from the teacup, right down to the way her body slumped forward, as if she had orchestrated even her own downfall. But was this real? I forced myself to move, kneeling beside her motionless form, pressing 2 fingers to the side of her neck. A pulse. Faint but steady. She was still here. Still breathing. But unconscious. And that meant one thing. This wasn't an accident. This was a performance. I looked at the spilled tea, the liquid soaking into the wood of the table, curling around the porcelain like an offering. Had she done something to it? Or had she merely wanted me to think she had? The line between manipulation and reality blurred in this house, twisted into knots by years of deception and control. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, hurried and uneven. My sister-in-law. She appeared at the door, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. What happened? Her voice was breathless, laced with alarm, but her fingers clenched at the fabric of her sleeves. A nervous habit, a tell. I met her gaze, my own steady. She collapsed. Her lips parted, then closed. She didn't move closer. I rose slowly, the note still in my hand. She left this for me. Her gaze flickered to the paper, then back to my mother-in-law's still form. What does it mean? I exhaled, rolling my shoulders, keeping my voice even. I think she wanted me to see what she was willing to do. The words settled between us, heavy with implication. The air in the room felt charged, as if every unspoken word over the years had finally gathered here, filling the space between us. My sister-in-law swallowed, her throat bobbing. "You don't think she—" "I don't know," I cut in. "But I intend to find out." The next morning arrived like a whisper, quiet and unsettling. The house held its breath, waiting. I descended the stairs, my steps slow and deliberate, my thoughts weaving through every possible scenario. My mother-in-law was still unconscious when the paramedics had arrived last night. My husband had barely spoken, his expression unreadable as they carried her out. But now she was back. Back in her house. Back in her throne. And I had to face her. The dining room was almost eerily perfect. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting golden light over the pristine table. My mother-in-law sat in her usual chair, looking as composed as ever, as if nothing had happened. The only sign that anything was different was the slight pallor to her skin, the subtle weakness in the way her fingers curled around her cup. I took my seat across from her, feeling the weight of my husband's gaze from the other end of the table. My sister-in-law sat stiffly beside him, her eyes darting between us, waiting. Then the moment of reckoning arrived. My mother-in-law lifted her teacup, her fingers steady despite everything. She brought it to her lips, took a slow sip, then set it down with deliberate care. The silence stretched. Then she smiled. "Well," she murmured, her voice smooth as if we were discussing the weather. I didn't blink. "Well, what?" Her smile deepened. "Aren't you going to check my tea?" A slow, deliberate chill crawled down my spine, but I kept my expression unreadable. This was her game, her final move. And now it was up to me to decide how I played it. I reached for her cup. My husband inhaled sharply. My sister-in-law stiffened. But my mother-in-law? She simply watched. I lifted the cup, turning it slightly, observing the tea inside. No visible difference. No unusual scent. Nothing that would indicate a hidden ingredient. But that wasn't the point, was it? This wasn't about the tea. This was about control. I set the cup down gently, my fingers tracing the rim before meeting her gaze. "No," I said softly. Her eyebrow arched. "No." I leaned forward slightly, my voice unwavering. I don't need to check it. Her expression didn't falter, but I caught it. The slight flicker of something behind her eyes. Approval? Amusement? Perhaps both. You're certain, she pressed. I smiled then, slow and knowing. I know you. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table. And I exhaled, tilting my head slightly. And I know you'd never give up your crown so easily. Pause. Then something remarkable happened. She laughed. Not a small chuckle, not a sharp scoff, but a full, rich laugh that filled the room, startling my husband and sister-in-law into silence. It was a laugh of understanding, of recognition, of surrender, not in defeat but in respect. She wiped at the corner of her eye, still smirking. Oh, you are something. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She picked up her cup once more, taking another sip. You know, she mused, I spent years wondering if you'd make it. I held her gaze. And now? She set the cup down, folding her hands over the table. And now I know you have. The air between us had shifted, something silent but irreversible passing between us. She had spent years trying to break me. But now she saw me for what I was. Not just a survivor. Not just her equal. But something more. I stood slowly, my movements careful and deliberate. Enjoy your tea, I murmured, then turned and walked away. I didn't need to look back to know she was watching. Because for the first time since I had entered this house, I wasn't just a daughter-in-law. I was a queen in my own right. And I had just claimed my throne. I walked away from the table, my footsteps slow, deliberate. My mother-in-law's laughter still echoed in my mind, a sound that should have unsettled me but instead confirmed what I already knew. I had won. But victory in this house didn't come with celebrations. It came with weight. A shift in power that settled over my shoulders like an invisible cloak, one I had unknowingly tailored over the years. I reached the hallway, pausing for a moment to glance back. My husband sat stiffly at the head of the table, his hands gripping the edges as though steadying himself. My sister-in-law, still trapped in the confusion of what had just happened, looked lost, her eyes darting between me and their mother. And my mother-in-law? She sipped her tea. Unbothered. Unrushed. But I knew better now. She wasn't drinking because she was comfortable. She was drinking because she had seen the inevitable. The moment she had spent years fighting against had arrived, and instead of resisting, she had welcomed it. I turned away and continued walking. My room was as I had left it. Tidy, controlled, absent of the chaos that had gripped the rest of the house. But it wasn't a sanctuary. Not really. I had made a decision back at that table, one that couldn't be undone. There was no more pretending. No more waiting for someone else to take the lead. I had taken the throne. And now I had to rule. I sank into the chair near the window, rubbing slow circles against my temple as I let my mind process everything. The tea, the notes, the games, all of it had been leading to this. My mother-in-law had pushed me, tested me, and now she had given me something unexpected. Respect. I wasn't naive enough to think this was the end. No, this was merely the beginning of something new. She hadn't surrendered. Women like her never did. But she had acknowledged that I wasn't to be dismissed. That I had played her game and survived. A knock on my door snapped me from my thoughts. I turned my head slightly. Come in. The door opened hesitantly and my husband stepped inside. His face was unreadable but his posture was tight, restrained. He closed the door behind him but he didn't move closer. I waited. Finally he spoke. What just happened? I exhaled slowly. You tell me. His jaw clenched. She laughed. Like it was all some kind of joke. I leaned back, tilting my head slightly. Wasn't it? His eyes flickered with something. Frustration? Uncertainty? I wasn't sure. You're different, he murmured. I smiled, slow and knowing. You've said that before. His fingers curled at his sides. Because I mean it. I studied him, the way he shifted his weight, the way his breathing was just a little too controlled. He wasn't just confused, he was uncomfortable. The balance had changed and he was struggling to adjust. You thought she'd fight me, I said softly. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. You thought she'd refuse to let go, I continued, voice steady. That she'd keep pushing, keep controlling. His gaze dropped for just a second before meeting mine again. She never loses. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping into something softer, something sharper. Maybe she didn't. His breath hitched. Because he knew I was right. This wasn't a loss for her. This was a handover. A transition of power disguised as a final test. And the truth was he wasn't sure where he fit in anymore. I stood slowly, crossing the room until I was just a few inches from him. "Does that scare you?" His jaw tensed, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know," he admitted. I smiled, lifting a hand to brush my fingers against his chest, not in affection but in silent reassurance. "You'll figure it out." A beat of silence. Then I stepped back. He lingered for a moment longer as if considering saying something else, but then he simply turned and left, closing the door behind him. I let out a slow breath. I had secured my place in this house, but that didn't mean the war was over. It just meant the battlefield had changed. The next morning breakfast was different. Not in the food, not in the setting, but in the air itself. My mother-in-law sat in her usual chair, regal as ever, but there was something else now. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present. She no longer looked at me as if I were beneath her. My sister-in-law barely spoke, her eyes darting toward her mother as if waiting for her to snap, to reclaim control. But she didn't. And my husband, he was watching everything. Quiet. Calculating. When I lifted my cup of tea, I did so with slow, deliberate ease. Then I took a sip, never breaking eye contact with my mother-in-law. She smiled. And lifted her own cup. The clink of porcelain against wood was the only sound in the room. For the first time in years, we weren't adversaries. We were equals. And everyone else at the table? They were just trying to keep up. I set my cup down gently, wiping my lips with the napkin before speaking. "Lovely tea this morning." My mother-in-law's smirk was barely there. "I thought you'd like it." I let the silence stretch, the power shift settling into place. I had won. But I wasn't foolish enough to think this was the end. Because queens didn't rule in peace. They ruled in strategy. And in this house the game never truly ended. The tea had settled between us like an unspoken pact. The delicate clink of porcelain on wood, a subtle acknowledgement of the shift that had taken place. My mother-in-law no longer regarded me as an inconvenience. My sister-in-law barely dared to look in my direction, and my husband, he watched with the quiet calculation of a man trying to understand his place in a new world order. But something still felt unfinished. The battle had been fought, the throne secured, yet the air in the house carried an uneasy stillness. As if something or someone was still waiting to make their move. I didn't let my guard down. Not yet. After breakfast, I lingered in the dining room, my fingers tracing the rim of my cup, lost in thought. The tension had settled, but I knew better than to mistake that for peace. My mother-in-law had tested me, pushed me to the brink, only to welcome me into the power she once held. But women like her didn't just relinquish control. They evolved, adapted, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. A shadow moved in my periphery. I glanced up just as my husband approached, his expression unreadable. He waited until the others had left before speaking. "You handled her." It wasn't a question. It was an observation. A quiet admission. I tilted my head, offering a slow smile. "Did I?" His eyes narrowed slightly, but not in anger. In something closer to curiosity. "She respects you now." I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the warmth before setting the cup down. "She always did. She just needed to be sure." His jaw clenched, and for the first time in a long time he hesitated before speaking. "And me?" I raised an eyebrow. "What about you?" His fingers tapped against the chair, a nervous tick I had come to recognize. "Where do I fit in now?" I exhaled softly, leaning back in my seat. "That's up to you." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. He wasn't asking about his place in the family. He was asking about his place with me. The dynamic had shifted, and for the first time he wasn't standing in his mother's shadow, protected by the role of the indifferent husband. Now he was standing before a woman who no longer needed him to navigate this house. A woman who had found her own footing. And that unsettled him. I pushed my chair back and stood, smoothing out the fabric of my blouse. "If you're waiting for me to tell you what to do next, you'll be waiting a long time." His eyes flickered with something unreadable. "You don't need me anymore." I smiled, slow and knowing. I never did. I left him sitting there, the weight of my words settling over him like a verdict. The house had been built around control. Around alliances and unspoken hierarchies. And for years I had been at the bottom, scraping for a sense of belonging, waiting for permission to exist. But now there was no one left to grant me that permission. I had taken it, and there was no going back. That night the house felt different. The walls weren't whispering with tension. There were no lingering glances, no hidden power struggles. Everything had settled. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still coming. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the clock. My husband was beside me, but his breathing was still too even, too controlled. He wasn't sleeping. Neither was I. "You're thinking," he murmured into the darkness. I turned my head slightly. "And you're awake." Pause. "Then, is this what you wanted?" I let out a soft breath, turning onto my side to face him. I wanted to survive. His eyes searched mine, looking for something I wasn't sure I could give him. "And now?" he asked. I studied him in the dim light. The man who had once been a stranger in my own home. The man who had let his mother dictate the rules while I played the role I had been expected to play. But he wasn't her. And for the first time I realized that maybe he never had been. "Now," I murmured, "I want to live." His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his fingers twitching slightly against the sheets. "With me." I didn't answer right away. Because that was the final move, wasn't it? The last piece to be placed on the board. The decision that, for once, was entirely mine. I reached out, brushing my fingers over his wrist, feeling the slow, steady pulse beneath his skin. "That depends," I whispered. His voice was quiet, barely audible in the stillness. "On what?" I leaned in, my lips close enough to feel his breath. "On whether or not you're strong enough to stand beside me." The challenge was silent but understood. I had secured my place in this house. But I wouldn't drag him with me. If he wanted to be part of this new order, he would have to choose it for himself. The house was mine now. The power mine. The control mine. And if he wanted to stay, he had to prove he was worthy of being in my world. He exhaled slowly, the weight of my words sinking in. Then finally he nodded. Not in submission, but in understanding. And for the first time we weren't just playing a game. We were building something new. Together. Or not at all. I paid for his mom's surgery and planned his sister's wedding. But at dinner they smirked and handed me divorce papers. "Your job's done," his mother said. I smiled, stood up, and unzipped a folder. They went pale when they saw what I'd done. "Your job is done." Those 4 words hit me like a slap across the face as my husband slid divorce papers across the dinner table. I stared at the manila envelope, my name scrawled across it in Justin's familiar handwriting, while his mother Scarlett smiled, that cold, satisfied smile I'd grown to hate over the past 3 years. "We're so grateful for everything you've done, dear," Scarlett purred, cutting her pot roast with surgical precision. "The surgery, Madison's wedding, all those little expenses you handled. You've been such a dedicated wife." Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of financial empowerment. If you believe that everyone deserves respect in their relationships, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. Madison giggled into her wine glass, the sound sharp and grating. "It's like having the world's most organized personal assistant," she said, not even trying to hide her smirk. "Someone who actually pays for everything too." I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my marriage dissolve over dinner like sugar in hot water. The formal dining room that had always felt more like a courtroom now truly was one, and I was the defendant being sentenced. 3 years. 3 years of emptying my bank account for Scarlett's emergency surgery that insurance somehow couldn't cover. 3 years of planning and paying for Madison's dream wedding while she treated me like hired help. 3 years of being the family ATM while they whispered about me behind my back. "You understand, don't you?" Justin said, not quite meeting my eyes. "This arrangement has run its course. You've been useful, but it's time to move on." Useful. Like a kitchen appliance they were ready to replace. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. They were waiting for me to cry, to beg, to fall apart like they expected. Scarlett had that predatory gleam in her eyes, the one she got when she sensed weakness. Madison was practically bouncing in her chair, probably thinking about how quickly she could redecorate her house once I was gone. But instead of tears, I felt something else rising in my chest. Something cold and sharp and crystalline clear. I reached into my purse and pulled out a black leather folder. Thick. Heavy. Secured with a silver zipper that caught the light as I placed it carefully on the white tablecloth. The room went dead silent. "What's that?" Madison asked, her voice suddenly small and uncertain. I smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. "Insurance," I said quietly. Scarlett's fork paused midway to her mouth. "Insurance for what?" "For this exact moment." I kept my voice calm, conversational, like we were discussing the weather. "You see, I've been keeping track. Every dollar, every receipt, every little favor I've done for this family. And I've been very, very thorough." Justin leaned forward, his confidence starting to crack around the edges. "Melissa, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your mother's surgery wasn't covered by insurance because she lied on her application. I'm talking about the $18,000 I spent on Madison's wedding that she never legally registered. I'm talking about 3 years of financial records that tell a very different story than the one you've been telling yourselves." The color drained from Scarlett's face. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" I unzipped the folder slowly, deliberately, watching their eyes track the movement. "Funny thing about being an accountant, I document everything. Every bank transfer. Every forged signature. Every fraudulent insurance claim." Madison's wine glass trembled in her hand. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I pulled out the first document, a bank statement highlighted in yellow. "This is the transfer for $67,000 for your mother's surgery. Notice the date. 3 days after she was denied coverage for pre-existing conditions she failed to disclose." Scarlett's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "And this," I continued, producing another sheet, "is the contract for Madison's wedding venue. Paid in full by me with a very interesting clause about fraudulent marriages. Turns out when you never file the legal paperwork, it's not actually a wedding. It's just a very expensive party." "Stop," Justin said, his voice cracking. "Just stop." "Oh, I'm just getting started." I spread more documents across the table like playing cards. "Medical fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. You've been busy, haven't you? And the beautiful thing is you made it so easy. You never read what you were signing. You just trusted that sweet, stupid Melissa would take care of everything." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. Scarlett's hands were shaking now, and Madison looked like she was about to be sick. Justin stared at the papers scattered across the table as if they were written in a foreign language. "What do you want?" he whispered. I smiled again, wider this time. "Want? I don't want anything, Justin. I already have everything I need." I gestured to the documents. "Signed confessions, financial records, email trails. 3 years worth of evidence that you used me, manipulated me, and committed multiple felonies in the process." "You wouldn't," Scarlett breathed. "Try me." I stood up slowly, leaving the folder open on the table like a bomb with the pin pulled. "You want to know what your job has done? It is. You used me to clean up your messes, to pay your bills, to make your problems disappear. But here's the thing about problems, they have a way of coming back." I walked around the table, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with each measured step. "You thought you were getting rid of a liability. But what you actually did was create one. See, when you betray someone who handles your money, who knows your secrets, who has access to your entire financial history, well, that's just poor planning." Madison started to cry, quiet tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, we can work this out." "Work it out?" I laughed, and the sound was sharper than I intended. "You mean like we worked out your mother's surgery? Or your wedding? Or the 50 other emergencies I've funded over the years?" I reached the door and turned back to look at them one last time. 3 people who had used me, dismissed me, and thrown me away like garbage. Now they sat frozen around their perfect dinner table, surrounded by evidence of their own greed and stupidity. "Enjoy your divorce papers," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "I'll be sending some papers of my own very soon. Multiple copies to multiple agencies. Sweet dreams." I walked out into the night air, leaving behind 3 years of their manipulation and my own naivety. The folder remained on the table like a ticking time bomb, and for the first time since I'd walked into that house, I felt like I could breathe again. Behind me, I heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor and voices raised in panic. But I didn't look back. I had work to do. My hands shook as I drove home that night, the weight of 3 years crashing down on me like a collapsed building. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the darkness, engine ticking as it cooled, trying to process what had just happened. But the truth was, it hadn't just happened. It had been building for years, brick by brick, lie by lie. I remembered the beginning, how hopeful I'd been. How desperately I'd wanted to belong. When Justin first brought me home to meet his family, I'd been so nervous I'd baked 3 different desserts, unsure which one would make the best impression. Scarlett had taken one bite of my chocolate tart and declared it interesting, which I later learned was her way of saying terrible. But I didn't know that then. I thought if I just tried harder, if I proved myself worthy, she'd eventually accept me. The appointment started small. "Melissa, dear, could you drive me to the doctor? My back is acting up again." At first, I felt honored that she trusted me with something so personal. I'd sit in those sterile waiting rooms for hours, holding her purse, fetching her coffee, calling her insurance company when they inevitably had questions about her claims. "You're too eager," she'd tell me afterward, settling into my passenger seat with a dramatic sigh. "It's not a good look on a woman. Men don't like desperate wives." But I kept showing up. I memorized her schedule better than my own. Tuesday mornings were physical therapy. Thursday afternoons were her standing hair appointment at the salon across town. The expensive one she claimed was the only place that understood her delicate hair texture. Friday evenings were bridge club, where she'd complain about her daughter-in-law to her friends while I waited outside in the car like a chauffeur. I discovered her favorite pastries by trial and error. Almond croissants from the French bakery on 5th Street, but only on Sundays when they were fresh. I'd drive 20 minutes out of my way every weekend, standing in line with the other devoted family members and guilty spouses, spending money I couldn't afford on pastries she'd eat half of and throw away. "These aren't quite right," she'd say, breaking off a corner with manicured fingers. "Perhaps next time try that little place on Elm. I hear they're more authentic." But nothing was ever quite right. Not the pastries, not my timing, not the way I folded her laundry when she asked me to help with household tasks Justin was supposedly too busy to handle. I missed client meetings, rescheduled conference calls, and lost a potential promotion because I was always rushing off to handle another Scarlett emergency. Then Madison got engaged and everything escalated. "I need someone I can trust," she'd said, grabbing my hands with tears in her eyes. "Someone who really understands what makes a wedding special. Will you help me plan it?" I was so touched, so grateful to finally be needed, that I said yes before asking any questions. Planning Madison's wedding became my second full-time job. I researched venues during my lunch breaks, called caterers from the office bathroom, and spent my evenings creating color-coded spreadsheets that would make military logistics officers weep with envy. The venue deposit alone was $8,000. "Just put it on your card for now," Madison had said breezily. "We'll sort out the money later." Later never came. When I mentioned it, she'd get that wounded look in her eyes and say something about how she thought family didn't keep track of such things. I booked the photographers, the florists, the string quartet. I tasted 17 different cake flavors across 4 different bakeries. I spent an entire Saturday crawling around on the floor of a warehouse, sorting through thousands of fairy lights to find the exact shade of warm white that matched Madison's vision. "You're such a godsend," she'd tell people at bridal showers, her arm around my shoulders like we were best friends. I don't know what I'd do without her. But when her actual friends were around, the tone changed. I'd walk into rooms and catch the tail end of conversations that stopped abruptly when they saw me. Once I overheard her on the phone through the bathroom door at the bridal boutique. "She's like a free assistant," Madison was saying, her voice bright with amusement. "It's cute really. He tries so hard to be helpful. Justin says she's always been like that, desperate to please. Makes her easy to manage." Easy to manage. The words hit me like ice water. But it was Justin's transformation that cut the deepest. The man who'd once defended me at family gatherings, who'd pull me close when his mother made her cutting remarks, slowly began to drift away like a boat with a severed anchor. It started with small things. When Scarlett criticized the way I'd arranged the flowers I'd brought for Sunday dinner, Justin used to say, "Mom, they're beautiful. Melissa has great taste." Then it became, well, everyone has different preferences. Eventually, he'd just chuckle along with her criticisms as if my feelings were a shared joke between them. The night Madison accidentally spilled red wine on the white silk dress I'd lent her, a dress that had cost me 2 weeks' worth of grocery money, I expected Justin to at least acknowledge that it was unfortunate. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Accidents happen. It's just a dress. Just a dress. Just my money. Just my time. Just my dignity. He stopped touching me casually. No more hand on my back when we walked through doorways. No more absent-minded shoulder squeezes when he passed behind my chair. I became invisible in my own marriage, a ghost haunting the edges of his real life with his real family. The money request started after Scarlett's first surgery consultation. "Just a small loan, dear," she'd said, her voice weak and fragile. "The insurance is being difficult about coverage, and you know how these medical offices are about payment." I wouldn't ask, but $5,000. Then another $3,000 for additional tests. Then $10,000 more when the insurance claim was mysteriously denied. Always cash, always urgent, always with that wounded look when I hesitated. Madison's wedding expenses multiplied like bacteria. The caterer needed additional payment for unexpected costs. The florist had miscalculated the original quote. Invoices disappeared and had to be paid again. Every vendor seemed to have my phone number, my credit card information, and the assumption that I was personally responsible for every penny. "The booking confirmation must have gotten lost," Madison would say, wide-eyed and helpless. "Can you just handle it? You're so much better with these business things than I am." Justin waved off every questionable charge on our joint credit card. "Billing errors happen all the time," he'd say without looking up from his phone. "Just call the company and sort it out." But I was sorting it out by paying for everything twice. The tipping point came at Madison's engagement party. I'd spent 3 days cooking and decorating, transforming our backyard into something worthy of a magazine spread. I was exhausted, my feet aching from standing all day, when I overheard Madison holding court near the dessert table. "Melissa's basically Justin's secretary at this point," she announced to a circle of her sorority sisters, gesturing toward me with her champagne flute. "She handles everything: bills, appointments, party planning. It's like having staff, but family staff, you know." The group laughed, and Justin, standing right beside them, laughed too. Not uncomfortably, not defensively, but genuinely amused by his sister's characterization of his wife as hired help. I stood there holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres I'd spent hours preparing, watching my husband laugh at my expense, and something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. That night, after everyone had gone home and Justin had fallen asleep without helping clean up, I drove to the 24-hour pharmacy and bought a simple composition notebook. Black and white, nothing fancy, with lined pages that would hold 3 years' worth of documentation. On the first page I wrote the date and a single sentence: "Today I started keeping track." Then I began to write. Every dollar, every favor, every small humiliation. Every appointment I'd driven to, every bill I'd paid, every time they'd smiled to my face and laughed behind my back. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the sun started to rise, until I'd filled 12 pages with the true story of my marriage. And for the first time in 3 years I felt like I had some measure of control over my own life. The notebook would grow thick with evidence. But that night it was just the beginning of my journey back to myself. The next morning I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. My hands were steady as I dialed, my voice perfectly normal as I explained to my supervisor that I had a family emergency to handle. In a way, it wasn't even a lie. I spread everything across my kitchen table: bank statements, receipts, credit card bills, text messages, emails. 3 years of financial carnage laid out like evidence at a crime scene. The sheer volume was staggering. I'd been hemorrhaging money so gradually that I'd never seen the full picture until now. $67,000 for Scarlett's surgery. $38,000 for Madison's wedding. Countless smaller amounts. Grocery runs, gas money, restaurant bills where I somehow always ended up paying, utility payments when their accounts were temporarily frozen. The grand total made my stomach lurch. But I wasn't just collecting receipts anymore. I was building a case. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet, titling it Family Investment Portfolio. If they wanted to treat me like a business transaction, then I'd give them one they'd never forget. Every expense got categorized, dated, and cross-referenced with corresponding text messages or emails where they'd promised to pay me back next week, or assured me it was just this once. The beauty of being an accountant is that numbers don't lie. People do, but numbers tell the truth with brutal clarity. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Thanks again for everything yesterday. You're the best sister-in-law ever." I screenshot it and added it to a folder labeled Evidence of Acknowledgement. Every heart emoji, every "you're the best," every "I owe you big time," was now documentation of their awareness of the debt they'd accumulated. That afternoon I called my old college roommate Sarah, who'd become a financial advisor in Seattle. We hadn't spoken in months, but she answered on the second ring. "Melissa, what a surprise. How's married life treating you?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling. I need some professional advice and I need it to stay confidential." There was a pause. Sarah had always been sharp. "What kind of advice?" "The kind that turns gifts into loans retroactively." "Ah." Her voice shifted into business mode. "How much money are we talking about?" "Just over 100,000. The silence stretched longer this time. "Melissa, what the hell have you gotten yourself into?" I explained everything while Sarah took notes. By the end she was making those little clicking sounds with her tongue that meant she was thinking hard. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," she said finally. "Every transaction over $500 can be restructured as a personal loan if you have any documentation showing acknowledgement of the debt. Text messages count. Emails count. Even verbal agreements if you have witnesses." "What about the smaller amounts?" "Those are trickier, but if you can establish a pattern of lending behavior, you might be able to bundle them into loan modification agreements. The key is making everything look legitimate and above board." We spent 3 hours on the phone going through every transaction. Sarah helped me draft official loan documents, backdated but legal, with interest rates that were aggressive but not predatory. By the time we hung up, I had a folder full of legitimate financial instruments that transformed my family's casual exploitation into formal debt obligations. The next step required more courage than I thought I possessed. I made an appointment with Dr. Harrison's Scarlet surgeon, under the pretense of asking about postoperative care for my mother-in-law. I brought my lawyer, Janet Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in medical billing disputes. "Mrs. Chin," Dr. Harrison said, settling behind his desk with Scarlett's file. "Your mother-in-law's recovery has been remarkable. The procedure was quite extensive, but she's healing beautifully." "I'm actually here about the billing," I said, watching his expression shift. "There seems to have been some confusion about payment responsibility." I handed him a folder containing the loan documents Sarah had helped me create, along with copies of all the payments I'd made directly to his office. "As you can see, I've been covering Mrs. Patterson's medical expenses as a personal loan to her family. However, given the substantial amount involved, I need to ensure proper documentation exists in your files." Janet leaned forward. "We'd like to add a creditor protection clause to Mrs. Patterson's account. If the loan payments cease, my client needs legal recourse to recover the medical equipment and procedures she's funded." Dr. Harrison looked uncomfortable. "I'm not sure I understand." "It's quite simple," Janet explained, her voice crisp and professional. "Mrs. Chin has essentially financed Mrs. Patterson's surgery. If Mrs. Patterson defaults on repayment, the medical devices, procedures, and ongoing care revert to Mrs. Chen's ownership until the debt is satisfied." "That's unusual, but perfectly legal," Janet assured him. "Medical debt can be secured against the procedures themselves. We just need your office to acknowledge Mrs. Chin as the primary financial stakeholder in this case." 30 minutes later, we walked out with signed documentation that gave me legal claim to Scarlett's surgical outcomes. It wouldn't cause her physical harm, but it would give me leverage she couldn't ignore. Madison's wedding vendors were easier targets. I'd been the one signing contracts, providing credit card information and handling communications. Technically, I was already the primary contractor for most services. I spent the next week making calls, each conversation carefully scripted and recorded with the vendor's permission. "Hi, this is Melissa Chin calling about the Patterson wedding contract. I need to add some clarification to our payment terms. To the caterer, if the final payment isn't received by the specified date, we'll need to cancel the reception service. To the florist, I'd like to add a clause stating that all floral arrangements remain my property until payment is complete. To the band, could we modify the contract to specify that performance is contingent on final payment 24 hours in advance?" Each vendor agreed readily. They were used to nervous families wanting extra security on their wedding investments. They had no idea they were helping me build a house of cards that could collapse with a single phone call. The final piece was the most delicate. I needed access to Richard Patterson's estate documents, Scarlett's deceased husband's paperwork. I knew she kept everything in the file cabinet in her home office, but I needed a legitimate reason to be there. The opportunity came when Scarlett called asking me to help organize her tax documents. "You're so good with numbers, dear," she said, her voice honey-sweet over the phone. "And I simply can't make sense of all these forms." I spent an entire Saturday in her office, methodically photographing every document while she napped on the couch downstairs. Richard's will, insurance policies, property deeds, bank statements from accounts that had never been properly closed. A treasure trove of legal loose ends. The estate attorney I consulted, Marcus Reed, was a grandfatherly man with kind eyes and a steel-trap mind for legal details. "This is quite irregular," he said, studying the documents I'd brought him. "Mrs. Patterson appears to have several outstanding obligations tied to her late husband's estate that were never properly resolved." "What kind of obligations?" "Medical debt for one. Credit card debt that was supposed to be settled through the estate. And..." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "There's a promissory note here for a substantial sum that was never collected." "A promissory note?" "From Mrs. Patterson to her husband's business partner, dated 6 months before his death. $50,000. If this was never satisfied..." He looked up at me with sharp intelligence in his eyes. "Someone could file a lien against the family home to collect on this debt. Even now. Years later. Estate debt doesn't disappear just because people ignore it, Mrs. Chen. If someone had legitimate claim to represent this debt..." He let the sentence hang in the air. 2 weeks later, I walked out of Marcus Reed's office with legal documents that gave me the right to file a lien against Scarlett's house. The promissory note had been real, the debt legitimate, and through a series of perfectly legal transfers, I now owned that obligation. Everything was in place. Every smile, every dismissive laugh, every casual exploitation now had a corresponding legal document. They'd built their house of cards on my back, but I'd been laying the foundation for their fall the entire time. I sat in my car outside Marcus's office, holding the final piece of my puzzle, and smiled for the second time in years. They wanted to play games with my life. Time to show them what a real player looked like. The sound of that zipper opening was the loudest thing in the room. I watched their faces as I spread the first document across their pristine white tablecloth. A detailed spreadsheet with their names highlighted in yellow, red, and what I'd come to think of as betrayal blue. "Let's start with the basics," I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "Scarlett, your total debt to me is currently $67,432. This includes your surgery, postoperative care, medications, and the lovely recuperation vacation to Cabo you claimed was medically necessary." Scarlett's fork clattered against her plate. "Debt? I never agreed to any debt. Those were gifts." I smiled and pulled out a manila folder thick with printouts. "Actually, you did. Right here." I placed a series of text messages in front of her, blown up to 12-point font so she couldn't claim she couldn't read them. "April 15th, you texted me, 'We'll pay you back as soon as insurance comes through.' May 3rd, 'You're an angel, we'll make this right.' June 22nd, 'I owe you everything.'" Her face went white as bone china. Those were just expressions of gratitude. Were they? I turned to a fresh page in my folder. "Because here's your signed acknowledgement of the loan terms my financial advisor sent you. The email you replied to with, 'Sure, whatever she said,' has been legally binding since the moment you hit send." Justin leaned forward, trying to read over his mother's shoulder. "This is ridiculous. You can't just retroactively." "Actually, I can." I pulled out another document, this one bearing an official letterhead. "Sarah Morrison, Certified Financial Advisor, State License Number 4471. She's very good at what she does. Turns out, when someone accepts money with the acknowledgement that it will be repaid, and that acknowledgement is documented, it constitutes a binding loan agreement under state law." Madison's wine glass trembled in her hands. "What about my wedding? You can't possibly..." "Oh, honey." I turned several pages, revealing a new section of horrors. "Your wedding is the most interesting part. Madison Patricia Henderson. Except that's not your legal name anymore, is it? You never filed the marriage certificate. You never submitted the paperwork to the county clerk. You never registered with the state." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your beautiful wedding last month? Legally meaningless. You're not married, Madison. You had a very expensive party where you played dress up. I flipped to the next page. And since the venue, caterers, photographers, and band were all contracted under my name, as the financial guarantor, I own that party. Which means I can cancel your upcoming reception. Cancel, she whispered. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. Already done. The Riverside Country Club received my cancellation this morning. Full refund minus the service fee. Your dress? Custom order that was never legally transferred to your ownership. The band you booked for your anniversary party next month? Also cancelled. The photographers who were supposed to deliver your wedding album? Well, since there was no legal wedding, there's no legal obligation to deliver the photos. Madison started to cry, but I wasn't finished. But the really beautiful part, I continued, spreading more documents across the table, is that none of this is personal. It's just business. The same kind of business you've been conducting with my money for 3 years. Justin tried to grab one of the papers, his hands shaking with what I assumed was rage. This is insane. None of this will hold up in court. I laughed, genuinely amused for the first time all evening. Court? Oh, Justin, we're not going to court. We're way past that. I pulled out a thick folder labeled Communications and opened it to reveal hundreds of printed screenshots. Do you remember this text thread from last Christmas? Where you and Madison were making fun of my desperate attempts to fit in with the family. His face went gray as he recognized his own words staring back at him. Or this email chain where you three discussed how to get me to pay for Madison's wedding without making it seem like you were asking for money? I flipped through the pages like a flipbook, watching their expressions change with each revelation. Or my personal favorite, the voice message Scarlett left me last month where she said, and I quote, "Melissa's so eager to help, we should take advantage of it while we can." Scarlett's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The thing about being married to someone for 3 years, I said, organizing the papers into neat piles, is that you have access to their phone, their email, their text messages. Especially when they're careless enough to leave everything synced to the family computer. I reached into my bag and pulled out a tablet, swiping to a video file. Would you like to see the security footage from Madison's engagement party? The part where you all discussed how pathetic I was for trying so hard. Or should we skip to the good part where you planned this whole dinner ambush? The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Madison's tears had stopped, replaced by a look of pure terror. Scarlett sat frozen, her hands clenched in her lap. Justin stared at the tablet screen as if it might explode. Here's what's going to happen, I said, closing the tablet and setting it aside. You're going to sit there and listen while I explain exactly how deep you've dug yourselves. Because we're not even to the good part yet. I pulled out the final folder, the thick one that had been sitting in my lawyer's office for 2 weeks, growing heavier with each additional document we'd added. Scarlett, remember when you asked me to help organize your tax documents? Such a thoughtful daughter-in-law helping with all that tedious paperwork. I opened the folder to reveal photocopies of documents she'd never expected to see again. Funny thing about estate planning, sometimes important details get overlooked for years. Her eyes widened as she recognized her late husband's handwriting on a promissory note. $50,000, I read from the document. Borrowed from Patterson and Associates, never repaid. The debt was supposed to be settled through the estate, but somehow that never happened. Amazing how paperwork can just slip through the cracks. That debt was forgiven when Richard died, Scarlett stammered. Was it? I turned the page to reveal a legal transfer document. Because according to the estate settlement company, this debt was sold to a collection agency last month. And that collection agency just happened to transfer the debt to a private individual. I smiled sweetly. Me. Justin finally found his voice. You can't seriously expect us to believe that I now legally own the debt secured against this house? I pulled out the final document, a lien notice bearing official stamps and signatures. Actually, yes. I can and do expect you to believe it because it's true. This house, the one you're sitting in right now, is collateral for a debt that's been accumulating interest for 4 years. The paper fluttered as I placed it in the center of the table, right next to their abandoned dinner plates. At current interest rates, the total owed is $73,600. Add that to Scarlett's medical debt, Madison's wedding debt, and 3 years of miscellaneous family expenses, And we're looking at just over $200,000 in total obligations. Madison's voice came out as barely a whisper. 200,000? $214,876, I corrected. To be precise. The house settled around us with a small creaking sound, as if the walls themselves were sighing under the weight of what I'd just revealed. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the dining room windows before disappearing into the night, leaving us in our circle of damning documents and shattered illusions. Now, I said, folding my hands in my lap like I was about to discuss weekend plans, shall we talk about payment terms? The silence that followed my question about payment terms lasted exactly 14 seconds. I know because I counted, watching the reality sink into their faces like water into sand. Scarlett was the first to crack. How could you be this heartless? She gasped, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest. After everything we gave you, the love, the acceptance, the place in our family. I laughed, actually laughed, and the sound echoed off the dining room walls like breaking glass. Love. Acceptance. I wiped tears from my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. You gave me chores and debt, Scarlett. You gave me 3 years of feeling like a servant in my own marriage. That's not true, she protested, but her voice wavered. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a specific recording. Should I play the voice message where you told your bridge club that I was useful for manual labor but not much else? Or maybe the one where you said Justin could do so much better if he wasn't stuck with someone so desperate? Her face crumpled like wet paper. Madison suddenly pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. This is insane, she shrieked, mascara already starting to run down her cheeks. You can't just destroy people's lives because you're having some kind of mental breakdown. Mental breakdown? I remained seated, completely calm while she paced behind her chair like a caged animal. Madison, I'm an accountant. This is what accountants do. We track expenses, calculate returns on investment, and assess when assets become liabilities. I'm not a liability, she wailed. Aren't you? I turned to a fresh page in my folder. $38,000 for a wedding that never legally happened. $12,000 in borrowed money that was never repaid. $6,000 in damaged or lost items I lent you. Another $4,000 in dinners, shopping trips, and spa days I paid for while you complained about being broke on social media. Her pacing grew more frantic. Those were family things. Sisters-in-law do things for each other. Do they? I looked up at her with genuine curiosity. What exactly did you do for me, Madison? Because I've been going through 3 years of memories and I can't seem to recall a single instance where you spent your money on me, helped me with anything, or showed up when I needed support. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. That's what I thought. I turned back to my documents. You ruined your future the day you built it on lies and other people's money. I just documented the process. Madison fled the room then, her sobs echoing from the hallway as her heels clicked against the marble floor. I heard a door slam somewhere in the depths of the house, followed by muffled wailing that sounded like a wounded animal. Justin, who had been sitting in stunned silence throughout this exchange, finally found his voice. Melissa, please. We can fix this. His eyes were wide and desperate, darting between my face and the documents spread across the table. Let's talk about this rationally. Like adults. I met his gaze with a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. Talk? Like adults. I leaned back in my chair, studying the man I'd once thought I'd spend my life with. When exactly did you start considering me an adult, Justin? Was it when you stopped defending me to your mother? When you started laughing at your sister's jokes about me being the hired help? Or maybe when you planned this whole dinner ambush without giving me so much as a heads up? He struggled to find words. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? I asked, genuinely curious. Were you going to ease me into the idea that my marriage was a business transaction? Maybe give me a performance review first? Great job handling our finances, mediocre job at being a wife. We're letting you go, but thanks for your service? He flinched as if I'd struck him. That's not fair. Fair. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Justin, I spent 3 years trying to earn a place in your family while you all treated me like a combination ATM and personal assistant. I funded your mother's surgery, planned your sister's wedding and subsidized your entire lifestyle. And your response to my dedication was to hand me divorce papers over dinner like I was getting fired from a job I didn't even know I was interviewing for. We never asked you to. Yes, you did. I pulled out another folder, this one filled with printed text messages. You asked constantly. Could you help Mom with her medical bills? Madison really needs help with wedding costs. Just this once, we'll pay you back. You asked and asked and asked, and when I gave and gave and gave, you decided I was pathetic for being so willing to help. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 o'clock, its deep bronze tones marking the passage of time like a funeral bell. Justin's shoulders sagged as the weight of his choices settled on them. This wasn't a marriage, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the aftermath of Madison's dramatic exit. This was a transaction. I was the investor, you were the beneficiaries, and now it's time to settle the books. The deal's closed. As if summoned by my words, the doorbell rang. Justin's head snapped up. Who could that be? I checked my watch. Right on time. I stood and walked toward the front door, my heels clicking against the floor with the same steady rhythm as a metronome. That would be my legal representation. You're what? I opened the door to reveal Janet Walsh, my attorney, accompanied by a stern-looking man in a charcoal gray suit carrying a briefcase that looked expensive enough to fund a small car purchase. Mrs. Chin, Janet said with professional warmth. I hope we're not interrupting dinner. Not at all, I replied, stepping aside to let them enter. We were just discussing payment schedules. The man in the gray suit extended his hand to Justin, who stood frozen by the dining room table like a deer caught in headlights. Mr. Patterson? I'm David Reeves from Morrison & Associates Collections. I believe we have some documents for you. Janet opened her briefcase with the efficiency of a surgeon preparing for an operation. We have foreclosure notices, debt collection demands, and medical payment enforcement documents. There are also cancellation notices for various services and contracts currently under Mrs. Chen's financial control. Scarlett made a sound like a balloon losing air. Foreclosure. The lien on this property is quite substantial, David explained, consulting his paperwork. Given the accumulated debt and interest, immediate payment would be required to avoid foreclosure proceedings. How immediate? Justin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 30 days, Janet replied crisply. Though given the amount owed, we're prepared to discuss alternative arrangements. Madison reappeared in the doorway, her face blotchy and tear-stained. Alternative arrangements? I turned to face all three of them, standing there in their expensive dining room surrounded by the debris of their former certainty. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the presence of legal authority and the cold reality of consequences. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady as a heartbeat. You're going to sit down, you're going to listen, and you're going to understand that every choice has a price. You spent 3 years treating me like I was disposable, and now you're going to learn what it costs to dispose of someone who's been keeping track. They scrambled to their chairs like children called to attention by a stern teacher. Scarlett's hands shook as she reached for her water glass. Madison hiccuped quietly, trying to control her breathing. Justin stared at the legal documents spreading across his table like a plague of official papers. I remained standing, looking down at the three people who had shaped and then shattered my world, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete control over my own destiny. Now, I said as Janet and David took their positions flanking the table like bookends of justice, let's talk business. The negotiations lasted until 3 in the morning. I sat in that dining room for 7 hours, watching three people who once controlled my life scramble to salvage whatever pieces they could from the wreckage of their own making. Janet and David worked with clinical precision, laying out payment schedules, asset seizures, and legal consequences while I observed like a scientist studying lab rats in a maze. By the end, Scarlett had agreed to sell her jewelry collection to cover part of her medical debt. Madison would forfeit her trust fund, the one she'd never bothered to mention, while letting me pay for everything. Justin signed over his share of the family business to a debt management company that would garnish his wages for the next 15 years. The house would go into temporary receivership while they arranged to buy back their own debt at 60 cents on the dollar. They'd be renters in their own home until they could prove financial stability. I didn't feel triumphant walking out of that house. I felt empty, like a balloon that had finally stopped holding air. The weight I'd carried for 3 years was gone, But so was everything else. The hope, the love, the dreams of a different ending. 3 weeks later, I stood in my new apartment holding a single key. The studio was nothing like the sprawling house I'd shared with Justin. 400 square feet of honesty. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and office. A tiny kitchen with exactly enough space for one person's meals. A bathroom with a shower just wide enough for me to stretch my arms without touching the walls. It was perfect. I set my last box on the second-hand table I'd bought from a college student moving back home. Everything in this space was mine. Paid for with my money, chosen by my taste, arranged for my comfort. No compromises, no negotiations, no walking on eggshells around other people's preferences. The silence was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I unpacked slowly, savoring each decision. Where to put my books, how to arrange my few pieces of furniture, which corner would get the most morning light. For the first time in years, every choice was mine alone. That evening, I lit a single candle, lavender, the irony not lost on me, and sat at my new table to read the mail that had been forwarding to my temporary address. The letter from Dr. Harrison's office was brief and professional. Scarlett's account had been marked payment pending while the legal issues were resolved. Her medical care would continue uninterrupted, but the debt enforcement clause remained active. I'd never wanted to hurt her physically. Her pride, on the other hand, had been overdue for a reality check. I pulled out a piece of cream-colored stationery, a small luxury I'd bought for myself, and wrote a handwritten note to Rebecca Martinez, the paralegal who'd helped me navigate the estate debt transfer. Her patience and attention to detail had made everything possible, but more importantly, she'd listened to my story without judgment and believed that I deserved better. Dear Rebecca, I wrote, thank you for helping me find my voice in the language that matters most. Legal documentation. You didn't just help me with paperwork. You helped me reclaim my life. The next morning, I walked into a community center downtown and sat in a circle of folding chairs with 12 other women. The support group for survivors of financial abuse met every Thursday evening, but I'd been too ashamed to attend while I was still trapped in my situation. Would anyone like to share? Asked Dr. Patricia Wong, the therapist who led the group. I raised my hand before I could lose my nerve. I'm Melissa, I said, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. I was married for 3 years, and for 3 years I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought if I just gave enough money, time, dignity, I'd eventually earn my place in my husband's family. Heads nodded around the circle. I saw recognition in their eyes, the knowing look of women who'd walked similar paths. I paid for his mother's surgery, his sister's wedding, their bills, their emergencies, their wants disguised as needs. And when they were done using me, they handed me divorce papers over dinner and thanked me for my service. My voice caught slightly on the last words, but I pushed through. I was never the wife. I was the investor. A woman across the circle started crying quietly. Another reached over and squeezed my hand. The thing is, I continued, I thought investors were supposed to get a return. Turns out, when you're a good enough accountant, you can collect on any debt, even emotional ones. After the meeting, 3 women approached me with their own stories. Sarah, whose ex-husband had emptied their joint accounts and left her with his credit card debt. Maria, whose boyfriend had convinced her to co-sign for a car he crashed while driving to another woman's house. Linda, whose children had systematically drained her retirement fund with a series of manufactured emergencies. We stood outside the community center under the streetlights, sharing phone numbers and promises to stay in touch. For the first time since my marriage ended, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That night, I sat at my small table with the composition notebook I'd started 3 years ago, the one that had begun with, "Today I started keeping track." The pages were full now, dense with figures and dates and the careful documentation of my own exploitation. I turned to the very last page and wrote, June 15th. Final entry. I wasn't the wife. I was the investor. And I collected every cent. Today I start keeping track of something different. The life I'm building with my own choices, my own money, my own dreams. The ledger is balanced. The books are closed. Time to start a new story. I closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf next to my accounting textbooks and the small collection of novels I'd never had time to read while I was busy managing other people's lives. Tomorrow I would start freelance bookkeeping for small businesses. Honest work for honest pay, helping people manage their finances instead of enabling their manipulation. I'd already lined up 3 clients who valued my skills and paid my rates without negotiation. I blew out the lavender candle and went to bed in my own space on my own schedule with my own dreams waiting in the darkness. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without checking my phone, without worrying about someone else's emergency, without calculating how much their next crisis would cost me. I slept the sleep of someone who had finally learned the difference between love and transaction, between generosity and exploitation, between marriage and business arrangement. I slept like a woman who had collected her debts and bought back her own life. And in the morning I would wake up free. If this story of financial justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Melissa unzipped that black folder and watched their faces go pale, knowing she held all the cards. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.